You've been taught to believe that if people don't understand your choices, then something must be wrong with you, that if your path confuses others, raises questions, or makes people uncomfortable, then maybe you should slow down, explain yourself, or even turn back. But if that were true, why have so many people who followed the crowd still felt lost inside? Why do so many people live lives that look accepted on the outside but feel empty within? The truth is this: not everyone is meant to understand your path, and from a Buddhist perspective, they were never supposed to. Your journey is not designed to be approved by everyone. It is designed to awaken something deeper within you. For centuries, Buddhist wisdom has reminded us that the path toward inner clarity often looks strange to those who are not walking it. The Buddha himself left behind comfort, status, and expectations, not because people agreed with him, but because something inside him had begun to see the world differently. And when someone begins to see clearly, others who are still asleep may not understand. Tonight, as you listen to these reflections, something inside you may begin to relax. The pressure to explain yourself will start to fade, the need for approval will slowly loosen its grip, and the fear of being misunderstood will begin to dissolve like mist under the morning sun. When you wake up tomorrow, the opinions around you may not feel as heavy. The path ahead may feel quieter, calmer, and more certain, because the moment you stop trying to make everyone understand you is the moment your real journey begins. This is not just another message to fall asleep to. This is a quiet reminder that your path was never meant to be crowded. Are you ready? Let's begin. The moment someone begins to walk a different path, questions begin to appear. People look closer, not because they understand, but because they feel something unfamiliar. Silence becomes uncomfortable for them. Curiosity turns into judgment. Advice begins to flow from every direction. Yet the deeper truth behind this reaction is simple. Most people are not reacting to your path itself. They are reacting to the fact that your choices challenge the story they have been telling themselves about life. This is where the next insight quietly unfolds. A path built on truth does not require agreement. Sometimes the strongest decisions in life arrive without applause. They arrive quietly, without a crowd cheering from the sidelines. In fact, many of the most meaningful steps a person takes are the ones that others question the most. When someone begins to follow a deeper inner direction, it often disrupts the expectations people have built around them. Friends may feel confused. Family may feel uncertain. Even strangers may feel entitled to offer opinions about what they believe is the correct direction. But within the teachings of Buddhism, there is a profound reminder that truth is not validated by how many people agree with it. Truth simply stands. It stands even when no one recognizes it. It stands even when it looks unusual to those observing from the outside, and it stands even when the person walking that path must do so without reassurance. This idea becomes clearer when we look at the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who later became known as the Buddha. When he chose to leave behind the life of a prince, very few people understood what he was doing. His decision did not look wise to those around him. From the outside, it looked irrational. He had wealth, protection, comfort, and power. Yet something inside him recognized a deeper truth about suffering, impermanence, and the nature of life. That realization could not be explained in a way that would satisfy everyone, and it did not need to be. His truth did not require approval. What often creates suffering is not the truth itself, but the human desire to have that truth confirmed by others. The mind quietly begins to ask questions. Do they understand why I chose this? Do they see what I see? Do they believe I am making the right decision? These questions appear natural, yet they reveal a subtle attachment. The attachment is not to the truth itself, but to the validation of it. In Buddhist philosophy, attachment is one of the central sources of suffering. It appears in many forms. Sometimes it appears as attachment to possessions, sometimes it appears as attachment to identity, and sometimes it appears as attachment to being understood. When someone feels a strong need for others to agree with their life choices, the mind becomes dependent on external confirmation. Every opinion begins to carry weight. Every disagreement begins to feel like a threat. Every misunderstanding begins to feel like rejection. Slowly, the path itself becomes harder to walk, not because the path is wrong, but because the mind keeps turning back to see who is watching. But truth does not operate this way. Truth does not pause to collect votes. It does not wait for approval from the crowd before it becomes real. A mountain remains a mountain even if 1,000 people deny its existence. A river continues to flow even if someone refuses to acknowledge its direction. In the same way, the deeper truths that guide a person's life do not depend on agreement. This is why the Buddha often encouraged his followers to test truth through direct experience rather than through blind belief. In one of his well-known teachings, he explained that people should not accept something simply because it is tradition, because it is spoken by authority, or because many people believe it. Instead, truth should be examined through awareness and understanding. This approach creates a very different relationship with life. Instead of constantly looking outward for confirmation, a person begins to look inward for clarity. Instead of measuring decisions based on how others react, the focus shifts toward whether those decisions align with deeper awareness. Yet this shift is not always comfortable. When a person begins to live according to inner clarity, misunderstandings often increase before they decrease. People who are used to familiar patterns may struggle to interpret the new direction. They may try to place it inside categories they already understand. If they cannot explain it, they may assume it is wrong. But confusion from others does not invalidate truth. Consider how often the world initially resists new perspectives. Many ideas that later become widely accepted begin as something unusual. The human mind tends to trust what is familiar. When something challenges that familiarity, the first response is often resistance. This reaction is not necessarily malicious. It is simply the mind protecting the framework it already understands. From a Buddhist perspective, this reaction is linked to ignorance, not in the sense of stupidity, but in the sense of limited perception. Most people interpret life through the narrow lens of their own experiences. When they encounter a path that does not match their expectations, they struggle to see its meaning. This is why approval cannot be the foundation of truth. If someone builds their decisions on whether others agree, their direction will constantly change. One group will approve, another will disapprove. One moment will bring encouragement, another moment will bring doubt. The mind will move like a leaf in the wind, always adjusting to external forces. But when truth becomes the anchor, the movement changes. There is a quiet stability that begins to form. It does not mean the person becomes rigid or stubborn. Rather, it means the person understands why they are walking the path they have chosen. That understanding creates a calm strength that does not need constant reassurance. This strength often appears subtle. It does not announce itself loudly. It simply allows a person to continue walking without becoming entangled in every opinion that appears along the way. Many people misunderstand this kind of independence. They assume it means ignoring others or becoming indifferent to relationships. But the Buddhist approach is different. It encourages compassion and understanding toward those who question your path. Their confusion is not something to fight against. It is simply part of the human condition. Everyone sees life through a different window. Some windows are clear, some are fogged by fear, expectations, or past experiences. When someone cannot see your direction clearly, it does not mean your direction lacks truth. It only means they are looking from a different angle. Recognizing this allows patience to replace frustration. Instead of trying to convince everyone, a person begins to accept that understanding arrives at different times for different people. Some may eventually see the meaning behind your choices. Others may never see it at all. Neither outcome changes the truth itself. This realization brings a surprising sense of freedom. The energy that once went into explaining every decision can now be used for living the path itself. The mind becomes quieter. The need to defend every step begins to fade. Actions start to speak more clearly than explanations ever could. In many ways, this reflects the natural rhythm of wisdom. Wisdom rarely demands attention. It moves quietly, often unnoticed at first. Over time, however, its results become visible. Peace replaces restlessness. Clarity replaces confusion. Steady awareness replaces the constant noise of doubt. When others observe this transformation, something interesting happens. Some people begin to understand without needing explanations. They notice the calmness. They notice the consistency. They notice the absence of unnecessary struggle. These qualities speak more convincingly than words. Yet even when this recognition appears, the truth itself remains unchanged. It was never dependent on that recognition in the first place. In Buddhist teachings, this idea is sometimes reflected in the image of a lotus flower. The lotus grows in muddy water, surrounded by conditions that appear messy and unclear. Yet the flower itself rises above the surface, opening quietly in the sunlight. It does not ask the mud for permission to bloom. It does not wait for the water to become perfectly clear. It simply grows according to its nature. A life guided by truth follows a similar pattern. Conditions around it may be complicated. Opinions may swirl like currents in a river. But the direction itself remains steady because it is rooted in understanding rather than approval. Learning to trust this process takes time. Most people have spent years being trained to seek validation. From childhood, approval becomes a signal of safety. Praise becomes a sign that one is doing something correctly. These patterns become deeply ingrained, which is why stepping beyond them can initially feel uncomfortable. But Buddhism gently encourages moving beyond this dependence. It invites a deeper form of confidence, one that arises not from applause, but from awareness. When a person begins to observe their own thoughts, motivations, and intentions with honesty, they develop a clearer understanding of what truly matters. This clarity becomes a guide. It does not eliminate uncertainty completely, but it reduces the need to constantly consult the opinions of others. The mind becomes less reactive. Decisions become more intentional. Over time, the path becomes less about proving something to the world and more about living in alignment with what has been seen and understood. And this is where the deeper beauty of truth appears. Truth does not shout to be recognized. It does not compete for attention. It simply remains steady, like a quiet flame that continues to burn regardless of who is watching. Some people may eventually notice that flame and draw warmth from it. Others may walk past without ever seeing it. Both possibilities are part of the journey, but the flame itself remains unchanged. Truth continues to stand quietly, even when no one agrees with it. Yet something else begins to happen once a person starts walking according to that truth. Opinions begin to appear, judgments begin to form, people begin to interpret your life from the outside, often with great confidence. They speak as if they understand the whole story. But in reality, most people are seeing only a very small part of what is actually unfolding. This leads to another quiet realization. People judge your life with limited vision. A strange thing happens when someone observes another person's journey. The observer often believes they understand more than they actually do. They see a decision, a change, or a new direction, and within seconds the mind begins forming conclusions. Some people will say the choice is foolish. Others may say it is brave. Some will call it irresponsible, others may call it inspiring. Yet all of these opinions share the same limitation. They are built on fragments. The human mind rarely has access to the entire picture of someone else's life. It sees behavior, but not always the years of thought that led to that behavior. It sees outcomes, but not always the quiet struggles that shaped those outcomes. It sees visible actions, but not the invisible moments of reflection, doubt, and realization that guided those actions. Buddhist teachings have illustrated this limitation for centuries through a well-known parable. Several blind men are brought before an elephant for the first time. None of them can see the animal, but each is allowed to touch a different part of it. One man places his hands on the elephant's leg and concludes that the creature is like a pillar. Another touches the trunk and declares that the animal must be like a snake. Another feels the ear and insists it resembles a large fan. Another touches the tail and believes the creature is like a rope. Each man is confident in his conclusion, yet none of them is completely correct. Each person has encountered a real piece of the elephant, but they mistake their fragment for the entire truth. Their disagreement with one another does not come from dishonesty. It comes from limited perception. In many ways, this story reflects the way people judge each other's lives. When someone looks at your path, they are often touching only one small piece of the larger experience. Perhaps they see your career choice. Perhaps they notice your lifestyle. Perhaps they observe a decision you made that seems unusual to them. From that single observation, they attempt to define your entire journey, but they are touching only one part of the elephant. They do not see the experiences that shaped your thinking. They do not see the private moments when you questioned everything. They do not see the lessons learned through failure, loss, or reflection. These invisible elements remain hidden beneath the surface of your life, forming the foundation of choices that others cannot fully understand. This limitation is not a flaw unique to certain people. It is part of the human condition. The mind naturally tries to simplify complex realities. When someone sees another person making decisions that differ from their own, the brain attempts to interpret those decisions quickly. It fills in missing information using its own assumptions, experiences, and beliefs. This process happens almost automatically. Yet the conclusions that emerge from it are often incomplete. Someone who grew up valuing security may judge a person who leaves a stable career to pursue something uncertain. Someone who prioritizes tradition may struggle to understand a person who chooses a different way of living. Someone who has never experienced certain forms of hardship may misinterpret the motivations of someone who has. In each case, the judgment arises from a limited field of vision. The observer is interpreting your life through the lens of their own experiences. That lens may be sincere, but it is still narrow. It reflects only what they have personally seen and understood. Buddhist philosophy encourages awareness of this limitation. It reminds us that our perception of reality is shaped by countless conditions: upbringing, culture, memories, fears, and expectations. These influences create filters through which we interpret the world. When someone judges your path, they are often looking through these filters. Their reaction may say more about their own worldview than about your decisions. If a person believes that success must follow a specific formula, they may criticize anyone who chooses a different direction. If someone fears uncertainty, they may view exploration as recklessness. If someone values conformity, individuality may appear threatening. None of these reactions necessarily reveal the full truth of your path. They simply reveal the perspective of the person making the judgment. Understanding this can change the way you respond to criticism. Instead of seeing every opinion as a challenge that must be defended, you begin to recognize that most judgments are incomplete observations. They are attempts to understand something complex using limited information. This realization reduces the emotional weight of those judgments. It becomes easier to listen without absorbing every opinion as a personal attack. When someone comments on your life with certainty, you may quietly remember the parable of the blind men and the elephant. The person speaking may be touching one small piece of your journey, but they cannot see the whole structure that holds it together. Their interpretation may be sincere, but it is still partial. This awareness does not create arrogance. Instead, it creates patience. When you understand that others are viewing only fragments, frustration begins to soften. You realize that most people are not intentionally trying to misunderstand you. They are simply interpreting what they can see. And what they can see is limited. Every human life contains layers that remain hidden from public view. There are silent battles that never appear in conversation. There are insights gained during moments of solitude that cannot easily be explained. There are turning points that happen quietly, without witnesses. These unseen layers influence every step a person takes. Yet, observers often form judgments without knowing that these layers exist. They react to visible outcomes without recognizing the invisible processes that shape them. This is why Buddhism places so much emphasis on humility in perception. The teachings encourage people to approach life with curiosity rather than certainty. Instead of assuming that one's understanding is complete, there is an invitation to acknowledge how much remains unseen. When this humility develops, judgment becomes softer. Instead of declaring that someone else's choices are wrong, the mind becomes more willing to recognize that there may be information it does not yet understand. Questions replace assumptions. Listening replaces quick conclusions. But not everyone operates from this mindset. Many people continue to interpret the world using simplified narratives. These narratives help them feel secure because they make life easier to categorize. If someone's actions fit within familiar patterns, they are accepted. If those actions fall outside the expected pattern, they may be criticized. This pattern is especially common when someone chooses a path of inner exploration. Spiritual growth, personal transformation, or unconventional life decisions often challenge the expectations people hold. From the outside, such changes may appear confusing or unnecessary. Without experiencing the inner motivations behind those changes, observers may interpret them through their own frameworks. Yet the inner dimension of a person's life cannot be fully captured through external observation. Someone may leave behind a lifestyle that others admire because they recognize that it no longer aligns with their values. Someone may choose simplicity over status because they have discovered that peace cannot be purchased. Someone may step away from familiar routines because they sense that growth requires movement. To an observer, these choices may appear irrational, but to the person walking the path, they may represent clarity. This difference between internal clarity and external perception creates a gap in understanding. The person living the experience sees the entire landscape of their motivations, reflections, and insights. The observer sees only a few visible landmarks. The gap between these perspectives can be large. Recognizing this gap can transform the way you relate to other people's opinions. Instead of constantly attempting to bridge the gap through explanation, you may begin to accept that some distance will always remain. Not every experience can be translated into words that others immediately understand, and not every journey needs to be. The Buddhist path often emphasizes direct experience over verbal explanation. Certain insights become meaningful only through personal discovery. They cannot be fully communicated through description alone. This is similar to the difference between reading about a mountain and actually climbing it. A person who has stood at the summit carries a form of understanding that cannot be fully conveyed through language. Descriptions can hint at the experience, but they cannot reproduce it. In the same way, your life path contains experiences that others have not personally encountered. Without those experiences, their understanding will naturally remain incomplete. And that is perfectly natural. When this truth becomes clear, the need to convince others begins to fade. You realize that understanding often grows slowly. Some people may eventually see the deeper meaning behind your choices. Others may continue to interpret them differently. Both outcomes are part of the human story. The key is recognizing that someone else's limited vision does not define your reality. Your journey contains more dimensions than any outside observer can fully grasp. The quiet lessons you have learned, the personal reflections that shaped your decisions, and the subtle shifts in awareness that guide your actions all form part of a larger picture. Others may see only a portion of that picture, but the completeness of your path does not depend on how clearly they see it. Just as the blind men each encountered a different part of the elephant, people encounter different fragments of your life. Their conclusions may vary, their interpretations may differ, and their judgments may sometimes feel misplaced. Yet the whole of your journey remains larger than any single perspective, and as you continue walking forward, that realization can bring a quiet sense of peace. Even after realizing that people judge life with limited vision, something inside the mind often continues to struggle. A quiet tension remains. It appears in small thoughts that surface during silence. Questions begin to repeat themselves in the background of awareness. Why don't they understand? Why can't they see what feels so clear? Why does this path feel so difficult to explain? This tension reveals another layer of the journey. Because sometimes the real challenge is not other people's judgment. The deeper challenge is the mind's longing to be understood. A subtle feeling begins to rise when someone walks a path that others cannot easily recognize. At first, it may appear harmless. It can look like a natural desire for connection, a simple wish that the people around you could see what you see. But over time, this wish can quietly transform into something stronger. It becomes a need for validation, and this need can slowly turn into a hidden attachment. There is something deeply human about wanting to be understood. From childhood, people learn to look for signals of acceptance. Approval from parents, teachers, friends, and society becomes a sign that one is moving in the right direction. Praise feels safe. Agreement feels comforting. When someone says, "I understand you," the mind relaxes. But when understanding does not appear, something different happens. The mind begins to feel exposed. Doubt quietly enters the conversation. Questions arise about whether the path itself might be wrong, not because the person truly believes it is wrong, but because the absence of validation creates uncertainty. Buddhist teachings describe this reaction as a form of attachment that often goes unnoticed. It is not attachment to possessions or status, but attachment to being seen in a certain way. The mind begins to depend on recognition. It hopes that others will confirm the meaning behind one's choices. It hopes someone will say, "Yes, I see why you did that. I understand your direction." When this confirmation appears, the mind feels relief. But when it does not appear, frustration slowly grows. This cycle can quietly drain a person's energy. Instead of focusing on the path itself, the mind becomes occupied with how the path is perceived. Instead of walking forward with clarity, attention begins to turn outward. Thoughts revolve around what others think, how decisions look from the outside, and whether explanations are convincing enough. Without noticing it, the person becomes trapped in a subtle performance. The path is no longer guided entirely by inner understanding. It begins to carry the invisible weight of an audience. Buddhism invites people to observe this pattern carefully. The teachings emphasize that attachment often hides inside ordinary emotions. It does not always appear dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it hides inside something that feels completely reasonable. The desire to be understood is one of those places where attachment can quietly grow. When someone becomes aware of this attachment, an important shift begins. The mind starts to recognize that clarity does not actually depend on being validated by others. Understanding from the outside may feel comforting, but it is not necessary for truth to exist. Truth remains steady even when no one confirms it. This realization can be uncomfortable at first. Letting go of the need for validation means stepping into a kind of emotional independence that many people have never practiced before. The mind may initially resist this freedom. It may ask questions that seem logical. What if people misunderstand my intentions? What if they believe something untrue about me? What if they think I am making a mistake? These questions appear convincing, but they often come from the same attachment that Buddhism encourages people to examine. They reveal how much importance the mind has placed on other people's interpretations. Yet the deeper path of awareness asks a different question. What happens if understanding never arrives? If someone continues to walk their path without receiving approval, something interesting begins to develop. A different kind of stability slowly emerges. Instead of depending on external recognition, the person begins to rely on inner observation. The mind learns to ask quieter questions. Does this action align with clarity? Does it come from honesty rather than fear? Does it create more awareness rather than confusion? These questions shift the focus inward. Instead of performing for an invisible audience, the person begins to live according to deeper alignment. Decisions become guided by insight rather than reaction. The need to constantly explain fades because the path itself feels stable. This transformation does not mean a person stops caring about others. Compassion remains important. Communication still has value, but the emotional dependency on being understood begins to dissolve. A person can share their thoughts and choices openly, yet remain calm even when others interpret them differently. This is a subtle but powerful form of freedom. Without the pressure to constantly seek validation, the mind becomes quieter. It no longer needs to rehearse explanations or defend every step. Energy that was once spent managing other people's opinions becomes available for awareness itself. Life begins to feel lighter. Buddhist philosophy often describes attachment as something that binds the mind. It ties happiness to conditions that may or may not appear. When happiness depends on approval, peace becomes fragile. Every disagreement threatens stability. But when attachment loosens, peace becomes less dependent on circumstances. Understanding from others may still arrive, but it no longer determines the strength of the path. Whether people agree or disagree, the direction remains steady because it is rooted in direct experience. The Buddha's teachings repeatedly point toward this form of independence. In many discourses, he reminded his followers not to rely blindly on praise or criticism. Both are temporary. Both are influenced by perception, mood, and circumstance. What truly matters is whether a person is acting from awareness. When someone begins to live according to this principle, relationships also change. Conversations become less defensive. There is less urgency to convince others. Instead of arguing for recognition, the person listens more patiently. This patience often surprises people. When someone is no longer desperate to be understood, they become calmer in the presence of disagreement. They do not rush to correct every misunderstanding. They allow space for different perspectives to exist. Paradoxically, this calmness sometimes creates deeper understanding than explanations ever could. People often recognize sincerity through consistency rather than argument. When a person continues walking their path peacefully, without bitterness or resentment, others may gradually begin to see the intention behind it. But even when this recognition never appears, the person remains steady, because the need for validation has already loosened its grip. This shift allows the path itself to become clearer. When the mind stops dividing its attention between inner truth and external approval, awareness sharpens. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer filtered through the question of how they will be perceived. The path begins to feel more direct. It is no longer shaped by the need to manage appearances. It is shaped by understanding. Each step reflects the quiet alignment between intention and awareness. In many ways, this clarity resembles a river flowing through a landscape. When obstacles block the current, the water becomes turbulent. It twists and turns, trying to find a way around resistance. But when the path opens, the river moves smoothly. The mind functions in a similar way. Attachment to validation creates turbulence. Thoughts swirl around imagined reactions and possible judgments. But when the need for approval dissolves, awareness begins to flow more naturally. The direction becomes easier to follow. This does not mean life becomes completely free from misunderstanding. People may still question your choices. Some may continue to interpret your path through their own assumptions, but these reactions no longer disturb the mind in the same way. They become part of the landscape rather than obstacles. The deeper freedom lies in realizing that your path does not require constant confirmation from the outside world. It grows through experience, reflection, and awareness. Understanding from others may come slowly. Sometimes it arrives years later. Sometimes it never arrives at all. But the clarity that guides your journey does not depend on when or whether that recognition appears. And as this realization settles into the mind, something else quietly changes. The path becomes less about being understood and more about living truthfully. When the need for validation slowly fades, something else begins to reveal itself. The mind becomes quieter, and in that quietness, a deeper realization starts to appear. The reason your path feels different is not simply because others misunderstand it. It is because your journey was never designed to be identical to theirs. This realization opens the door to another important truth. Everyone walks with different karma. A quiet truth often hides beneath the surface of human life. Two people may grow up in the same city, attend the same schools, and even share similar experiences, yet the way they understand the world can be completely different. Their reactions to the same events may vary dramatically. One person may find meaning in hardship, while another may feel overwhelmed by it. One person may feel drawn toward a path of inner exploration, while another feels comfortable following familiar patterns. From the outside, these differences can appear confusing. People often ask why someone would choose a direction that seems unusual or unnecessary. But Buddhism offers an explanation that reaches deeper than personality or circumstance. It explains this through the concept of karma. Karma is often misunderstood. Many people think of it only as a form of reward or punishment. They imagine it as a cosmic system that simply balances good actions with positive outcomes and harmful actions with negative consequences. But within Buddhist philosophy, karma has a broader meaning. Karma refers to the chain of causes and conditions that shape each person's experience of life. Every action, thought, and intention leaves an imprint on the mind. Over time, these imprints influence the way a person perceives the world, the choices they make, and the lessons they encounter. These patterns extend across years and, according to traditional teachings, even across lifetimes. Because of this accumulation of causes and conditions, no two people walk through life with exactly the same inner landscape. Each person carries a unique set of experiences, tendencies, and unresolved questions. These elements quietly guide the direction of their journey. They influence what feels meaningful, what feels uncomfortable, and what lessons appear along the way. This is why your path may feel unfamiliar to others. What appears obvious to you may not feel important to someone else. What feels necessary for your growth may seem unnecessary from another person's perspective. The difference does not mean that one path is superior to the other. It simply reflects the unique conditions shaping each individual life. In Buddhism, the idea of karma encourages people to look at life with a broader sense of understanding. Instead of assuming that everyone should follow the same pattern, the teachings acknowledge that each person is responding to their own set of causes and conditions. Some people are learning lessons about patience. Others are learning about courage. Some are discovering the importance of letting go, while others are learning the value of commitment. These lessons appear through experiences that are specifically suited to the person encountering them. This is why comparison often leads to confusion. When someone compares their path to another person's journey, they are overlooking the invisible conditions shaping both experiences. They are assuming that two lives are operating under the same set of influences, when in reality the inner landscapes may be completely different. A decision that represents growth for one person may represent stagnation for another. A challenge that strengthens one individual may overwhelm someone else. The differences do not indicate failure. They simply reflect the complexity of karma unfolding in unique ways. Understanding this concept can bring a surprising sense of relief. When someone realizes that every life is shaped by its own set of conditions, the pressure to match someone else's path begins to fade. The mind stops asking why certain experiences appear at different times for different people. Instead of seeing life as a competition or comparison, it begins to look more like a series of individual journeys unfolding side by side. Each journey contains its own lessons. Some people are drawn toward quiet reflection early in life. Others may only begin questioning deeper issues after many years of following familiar routines. Some individuals encounter moments of transformation through hardship, while others discover clarity through gradual change. The timing of these experiences often reflects the unique momentum of karma. This does not mean that life is predetermined or fixed. Buddhism does not describe karma as a rigid destiny that cannot be influenced. Instead, karma represents a dynamic process. Each moment creates new causes that shape future experiences. The choices you make today influence the direction of tomorrow. But the starting point for each person remains different. The conditions that shaped your mind, your fears, your hopes, and your insights have formed a particular landscape through which your path unfolds. This landscape cannot be fully replicated by anyone else. Even people who appear to live similar lives may carry very different inner stories. One person may be quietly healing from past pain. Another may be searching for meaning beyond success. Someone else may be confronting patterns they inherited through family or culture. These internal journeys are rarely visible from the outside. When people judge your path without understanding these unseen conditions, they are essentially observing only the outer layer of your life. They may see the decisions you make, but they do not see the deeper currents guiding those decisions. In many cases, they cannot see the karma that shaped your motivations. Because of this, they may struggle to understand why certain steps feel necessary for you. They may wonder why you feel drawn toward a direction that seems uncertain or unconventional. Yet from the inside, those steps may feel like the natural continuation of everything you have experienced. A person who has spent years reflecting on the nature of happiness may eventually realize that external success cannot provide lasting peace. Someone who has experienced loss may develop a deeper awareness of impermanence. Someone who has observed the patterns of attachment may begin to move towards simplicity. These realizations do not appear randomly. They grow from the conditions that have shaped the individual mind. When Buddhism speaks about karma, it invites people to recognize the complexity of these conditions. It encourages compassion toward oneself and toward others. Instead of assuming that everyone should respond to life in the same way, the teachings remind us that each person is navigating their own set of influences. Some people are at the beginning of certain lessons, others are in the middle of them. Some have already moved through experiences that others have not yet encountered. This variation creates the diversity of human paths. Once this truth becomes clear, something important begins to change in the way you view your own journey. The feeling of being different no longer carries the same weight of confusion. It begins to make sense. Your path feels different because your life lessons are different. The challenges you face, the questions that occupy your mind, and the insights that guide your choices are part of the specific conditions shaping your awareness. No one else has lived exactly the same sequence of experiences. No one else has felt the same combination of fears, hopes, and realizations that have shaped your understanding of life. Because of this, expecting everyone to understand your path perfectly becomes unrealistic. They are responding to their own karma. Their perspectives are shaped by the experiences they have encountered. The lessons they are currently facing may be completely different from yours. What feels urgent and meaningful to you may not yet feel relevant to them. This difference does not mean your path lacks value. It simply reflects the diversity of human growth. Buddhist teachings often encourage patience with this diversity. Instead of trying to force others to understand your journey, there is an invitation to recognize that everyone is moving through life at their own pace. Some people may eventually reach similar realizations. Others may continue exploring different lessons. Both movements are part of the unfolding process of karma. When you begin to see life in this way, frustration begins to soften. The need to justify your direction becomes less intense. Instead of expecting universal agreement, you accept that each person is responding to their own conditions. Your task is not to replicate someone else's path. Your task is to walk your own with awareness. This awareness does not isolate you from others. In fact, it can deepen compassion. When you recognize that everyone is navigating their own karmic journey, it becomes easier to approach differences with understanding rather than judgment. Just as others may struggle to see your path clearly, you may not fully understand the lessons shaping their choices. This mutual limitation invites humility. No one sees the entire story of another person's life. Each individual is encountering experiences that others cannot fully grasp. By recognizing this, the mind becomes more gentle in its expectations. Instead of asking why someone cannot understand your direction, you begin to appreciate the complexity of human journeys. Each path unfolds according to conditions that are often invisible from the outside. And within that realization, something peaceful begins to grow. You no longer feel the need to explain every step. You simply continue walking. When it becomes clear that every person walks through life with different karma, a deeper understanding begins to grow. The differences between people's paths no longer appear strange. They begin to feel natural. Each person is responding to lessons shaped by their own experiences, their own conditions, and their own inner timing. Yet even with this understanding, another question often quietly appears in the mind. Why do some people recognize certain truths early while others seem completely unaware of them? This question leads to another important realization. Awakening happens at different times. There are moments in life when something inside a person shifts. It may not look dramatic from the outside, but internally it feels significant. A new awareness appears where confusion once lived. A pattern that once felt normal suddenly becomes clear. A belief that guided years of behavior begins to dissolve. These moments are often described in Buddhism as the beginning of awakening. Awakening does not mean becoming perfect or enlightened in a single moment. Instead, it refers to the gradual process of seeing life more clearly. It is the slow recognition of truths that were always present but previously unnoticed. This process unfolds differently for every person. Some people encounter these realizations early in life. They begin questioning the nature of happiness, attachment, and meaning, while others around them remain focused on external goals. These individuals may feel drawn toward reflection and self-understanding long before their peers show interest in such questions. Others may spend many years pursuing familiar paths before these questions arise. They may build careers, relationships, and identities that appear stable from the outside. Yet over time, something begins to feel incomplete. Success may arrive, yet satisfaction remains distant. Achievements may accumulate, yet a quiet restlessness continues to grow. Eventually, this restlessness becomes impossible to ignore. When this happens, the process of awakening begins to unfold. From the outside, these different timelines can create confusion. A person who has begun exploring deeper questions may encounter resistance from those who have not yet felt the same curiosity. Friends may laugh at their interest in spiritual ideas. Family members may dismiss their reflections as unnecessary or unrealistic. Sometimes people respond with mockery. They may criticize the changes they see. They may say that such ideas are impractical. They may treat the search for understanding as something strange or unnecessary. Yet within Buddhist thought, these reactions are not surprising. They simply reflect the difference in timing. Each person encounters the possibility of awakening when certain conditions come together. These conditions include experiences, questions, struggles, and reflections that slowly prepare the mind to see things differently. Until those conditions appear, certain truths may remain invisible. Someone who has not yet faced the limitations of material success may find it difficult to understand why others question it. Someone who has not yet experienced the instability of attachment may struggle to understand the value of letting go. Someone who has not yet observed the restless nature of the mind may not see the importance of inner awareness. These insights do not arrive simply because someone explains them. They arrive through direct experience. This is why awakening cannot be forced or rushed. It emerges when the mind becomes ready to recognize what has always been present. The Buddha himself emphasized this principle repeatedly in his teachings. He understood that wisdom cannot be imposed on someone who is not yet prepared to see it. Instead of forcing understanding, he encouraged patience and compassion. He recognized that people awaken at different times. There is a well-known story from Buddhist tradition that illustrates this idea. A monk once asked the Buddha why some people seemed unable to understand the teachings even after hearing them many times. The Buddha responded by describing a lotus pond. In the pond, different lotus flowers grow at different depths. Some lotus buds remain deep beneath the water, still developing. Others are closer to the surface, beginning to open. A few have already emerged into the sunlight, fully blossomed. The same sunlight reaches all of them, but each flower opens according to its own stage of growth. Human awareness unfolds in a similar way. Some people are still beneath the surface, developing quietly through experiences that will eventually shape their understanding. Others are beginning to question familiar patterns. A few have already recognized deeper truths. None of these stages are wrong. They simply represent different moments in the unfolding process of awakening. Understanding this helps reduce the pain of being misunderstood. When someone mocks your journey, their reaction often reflects the stage they are currently in. They may not yet have encountered the experiences that would allow them to recognize what you see. Their perspective is shaped by the conditions of their own life. Those conditions may change with time. Many people who once rejected certain ideas later become curious about them. Experiences such as loss, failure, or personal transformation can open the door to deeper reflection. What once seemed unnecessary may begin to feel meaningful. Someone who laughed at the search for inner peace may later discover that external success does not bring the calm they expected. Someone who dismissed spiritual reflection may eventually encounter questions that cannot be answered through ordinary explanations. In these moments, awakening begins to stir. This change often happens quietly. A person who once resisted certain ideas may suddenly become interested in them. They may begin asking questions they never asked before. They may look back at conversations from the past with new curiosity. What once sounded strange may begin to make sense. The person who mocked your path years earlier may one day find themselves walking in the same direction. This transformation is more common than many people realize. Life has a way of presenting experiences that gradually soften the certainty people once held. When beliefs are challenged by real situations, the mind becomes more open to new understanding. Yet this process cannot be predicted or controlled. Some people awaken through hardship, others awaken through reflection. Some encounter insights suddenly, while others approach them slowly over many years. Each path unfolds according to its own rhythm. Because of this, expecting everyone to understand your journey immediately can create unnecessary frustration. It assumes that others are standing at the same point of awareness. But in reality, each person is at a different stage of observation and discovery. When this difference is recognized, something important happens. Patience begins to grow. Instead of reacting to misunderstanding with anger, a person begins to see it as part of the unfolding process of awareness. Just as you once passed through earlier stages of understanding, others are currently moving through their own. Some may arrive at similar realizations later. Others may explore different directions entirely. Neither possibility invalidates the path you are walking. In fact, this recognition can deepen compassion. When someone mocks or dismisses your search for truth, you begin to see their reaction not as hostility, but as a reflection of where they currently stand in their own journey. They are responding from the perspective available to them, and that perspective may evolve. This awareness encourages a softer response. Instead of arguing or trying to prove your insight, you allow time to do its quiet work. You continue walking your path with sincerity and calmness. The steadiness of your actions becomes more meaningful than any explanation. Sometimes, years later, the person who once doubted you may return with questions. They may remember the conversations you once had. They may begin to see the value of the direction you chose. The understanding that once felt impossible may now appear obvious. But even if that moment never arrives, your path remains unchanged. Awakening is not a race. It is not a competition between people. It is simply the unfolding of awareness through time. Recognizing this can remove the pressure to convince others. You no longer feel responsible for accelerating someone else's understanding. Instead, you focus on cultivating clarity within your own mind. Your journey becomes quieter. Your patience becomes stronger, and your compassion grows deeper. Because you understand that everyone, in their own way, is moving toward the possibility of awakening. Some will arrive sooner, others will arrive later, but each step, whether recognized or not, is part of the unfolding journey of awareness. When it becomes clear that awakening unfolds at different times for different people, the tension around being misunderstood begins to soften. The mind stops expecting everyone to arrive at the same realization at the same moment. Yet even after understanding this, another experience often appears on the path, a quieter, more personal experience. Sometimes the journey forward begins to feel lonely. People who once walked beside you may no longer understand the direction you are taking. Conversations that once felt easy may start to feel distant. Certain interests fade while new questions begin to grow. It may seem as though the path is narrowing, leaving fewer companions along the way. This leads to another quiet truth that many people discover during personal growth. Walking alone sometimes means you're growing. There is a stage in many journeys where the outside world becomes quieter. It does not always happen suddenly. Often it unfolds gradually. Familiar routines begin to feel less meaningful. Certain environments no longer feel aligned with your inner direction. Relationships that once revolved around shared habits or expectations may begin to shift. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Human beings are naturally social. Connection is one of the most powerful forces shaping emotional life. For much of our existence, belonging to a group meant survival. Because of this deep instinct, stepping away from familiar social patterns can trigger uncertainty. The mind may ask difficult questions. Why does this path feel so isolating? Why does it seem like fewer people understand what I am searching for? Why does growth sometimes create distance instead of connection? Yet, within Buddhist philosophy, these moments are often recognized as important stages of transformation. Growth does not always happen in crowded spaces. Some of the most profound realizations arise during periods of solitude. When the noise of external expectations begins to fade, the mind gains the space it needs to observe itself more clearly. Without constant influence from surrounding opinions, deeper reflection becomes possible. This is why solitude has played such a significant role in many spiritual traditions. The Buddha himself spent long periods in quiet reflection. Before his awakening beneath the Bodhi tree, he walked away from the familiar world of status and comfort. He left behind the identity that others expected him to maintain. This step did not immediately lead to understanding, but it created the conditions necessary for deeper awareness to develop. That stage of solitude was not a sign of failure. It was part of the transformation. Many powerful shifts in human awareness occur in similar moments of quiet separation. When someone begins to question patterns that once felt normal, the path naturally diverges from those who are still following those patterns. This divergence can create the feeling of walking alone. Yet the loneliness is not always permanent. Often it represents a temporary phase, while inner clarity continues to develop. During this phase, the mind begins to reorganize itself. Old beliefs are examined, assumptions are questioned, habits that once felt automatic start to lose their influence. This process can be disorienting because it removes the familiar structures that once guided daily life. Without those structures, the path ahead may appear uncertain, but within that uncertainty, something new is forming. A deeper relationship with awareness itself begins to grow. Instead of relying entirely on external guidance, a person learns to observe their own thoughts and emotions with honesty. This internal observation becomes a compass that gradually replaces the need for constant outside direction. This is one of the most meaningful aspects of personal growth. It shifts the source of understanding from external approval to internal awareness. However, this transition rarely happens without discomfort. When someone begins changing internally, their outer life may temporarily feel out of sync with the people around them. Friends may notice differences in behavior. Conversations may move in directions that others find unfamiliar. Some relationships adjust to these changes, others gradually fade. This does not necessarily mean those relationships were unimportant. Often they played an important role during earlier stages of life. They may have offered support, companionship, and shared experiences that helped shape who you became. But as growth continues, certain connections evolve. The differences may appear small at first. Interests begin to shift. Priorities slowly change. Activities that once felt exciting may now feel empty. The person who is growing may begin seeking conversations about meaning, awareness, and personal reflection. Not everyone around them may share those interests. This is when walking alone can begin to feel more noticeable. Yet from the perspective of Buddhist teaching, solitude during transformation is not a sign of isolation. It is a stage where deeper understanding has the space to develop. When the mind is constantly surrounded by noise, it becomes difficult to hear its own deeper questions. Silence creates room for those questions to surface. During quiet moments, a person may begin noticing patterns they previously ignored. They may see how certain desires create restlessness. They may observe how attachment leads to disappointment. They may recognize how chasing approval creates unnecessary tension. These insights often emerge gradually. They are not usually announced with dramatic revelations. Instead, they appear as subtle shifts in awareness. A thought arises that had never appeared before. A reaction changes in a situation that once triggered frustration. Little by little, the mind begins to see more clearly. This clarity reshapes the path ahead. As awareness grows, certain environments may begin to feel misaligned. Situations that once seemed comfortable may now feel limiting. Conversations centered around superficial concerns may lose their appeal. This shift can make someone feel temporarily separated from familiar social circles, but this separation is not always negative. It can be part of the process of discovering a more authentic direction. When a person is growing, their inner priorities begin to change. Instead of chasing recognition, they may begin seeking understanding. Instead of focusing only on external achievements, they may begin exploring inner peace. These shifts alter the way life is experienced. Because of this, growth sometimes creates the feeling of standing between two worlds. The old patterns no longer feel natural, yet the new direction is still forming. This middle space can feel uncertain, yet it is also where transformation happens. The quiet distance from familiar expectations allows the mind to reorganize itself. Without the pressure to immediately conform to external patterns, awareness has the freedom to deepen. In this sense, walking alone does not always mean being abandoned. It can mean stepping into a phase of self-discovery. During this phase, a person begins to trust their observations more deeply. They learn to sit with questions instead of rushing toward easy answers. They develop patience with the unfolding process of understanding. This patience becomes an important part of growth. Instead of forcing progress, they allow insight to emerge naturally. Just as a seed needs time beneath the soil before it breaks through the surface, inner transformation often happens quietly before it becomes visible. Many of the most powerful changes in human life occur beneath the surface. Others may not immediately recognize them. A person may appear calm on the outside while experiencing profound shifts in perception internally. They may begin responding to situations with greater patience. They may release grudges that once seemed permanent. They may discover peace in moments that previously caused anxiety. These transformations rarely receive applause. They happen quietly, yet they shape the direction of a life in powerful ways. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. The solitude that once felt uncomfortable gradually becomes peaceful. The person begins to enjoy moments of reflection. Silence becomes less intimidating. Instead of feeling empty, it begins to feel spacious. Within that space, awareness continues to deepen. Eventually, new connections often appear. As a person's inner clarity grows, they naturally attract others who are exploring similar questions. Conversations begin to shift. Relationships develop around shared curiosity about life, awareness, and growth. These connections tend to feel different from earlier ones. They are often built on deeper understanding rather than shared habits alone. But even when these connections appear, the lessons learned during solitude remain valuable. They teach the importance of standing firmly in one's own awareness without depending entirely on external agreement. This independence creates emotional stability. A person who has learned to walk alone without losing direction becomes less vulnerable to external pressure. They can participate in relationships and communities without losing sight of their inner compass. Their growth becomes grounded, and with that grounding comes a deeper sense of peace, because the person understands that walking alone for a time was never a sign of being lost. It was a sign that something inside was quietly changing. When a person learns to walk alone without losing direction, something important begins to settle inside the mind. The fear of solitude slowly fades, and the quiet space that once felt uncomfortable begins to feel peaceful. Awareness deepens, understanding grows, and the person begins to see life with clearer eyes. Yet as this clarity continues to unfold, another change often appears, one that many people do not expect. The changes happening inside the mind do not remain isolated. They begin to influence the relationships surrounding your life. This leads to another truth that many people eventually discover. Growth changes your relationships. There is a quiet moment in many personal journeys when a person begins to notice that certain connections no longer feel the same. Conversations that once flowed easily may begin to feel strained. Activities that once brought excitement may begin to feel empty. People who once shared similar interests may suddenly appear to be walking in different directions. At first, this change can feel confusing. Nothing dramatic may have happened on the surface, no argument, no sudden conflict, no clear ending. Yet something inside the relationship feels different. The energy has shifted, even if neither person can fully explain why. This experience is very common during periods of personal growth. When the mind evolves, the lens through which life is viewed also evolves. Priorities begin to change, questions become deeper, awareness expands beyond patterns that once felt normal. As this transformation continues, it naturally affects the way a person relates to others. Relationships are often built around shared patterns. People connect through common interests, familiar habits, and similar ways of understanding the world. Friends may bond through shared routines. Families may connect through traditions and expectations. Social circles often revolve around activities that feel comfortable and predictable. These patterns create a sense of belonging. But when someone begins to grow internally, those patterns may no longer feel aligned with the direction of their awareness. The change is rarely intentional. It does not come from a desire to abandon people or reject relationships. Instead, it emerges naturally as the mind begins to see life differently. The questions that once seemed unimportant begin to feel meaningful. Instead of focusing only on surface-level conversations, the mind may begin searching for deeper understanding. Topics such as purpose, awareness, and inner peace may become more interesting than discussions about competition or comparison. This shift can create distance in certain relationships, not because anyone has done something wrong, but because the foundation of the connection is changing. Buddhist teachings often describe life as a continuous process of change. Everything is moving, evolving, and transforming from moment to moment. Relationships are part of this same movement. They are not fixed structures that remain identical forever. They grow, adapt, and sometimes dissolve. When someone begins to grow inwardly, their relationships are affected by this movement. Some connections deepen as both individuals evolve together. Others remain stable but shift in tone, and some slowly fade as the paths of the individuals diverge. This is not necessarily a negative outcome. Yet many people struggle with it because society often presents relationships as permanent structures that should never change. The idea that growth can reshape connections may feel uncomfortable, but change is part of life. Just as seasons transform landscapes, personal development transforms relationships. Think about how friendships form during different stages of life. A friendship built during childhood may revolve around shared environments such as school or neighborhood activities. As people grow older, their lives expand into new directions. Careers, interests, and values begin to influence the types of connections that feel meaningful. Some friendships adapt to these changes and continue to grow stronger. Others gradually become less active as life circumstances shift. This process happens quietly, often without conflict. Growth operates in a similar way. When someone begins developing deeper awareness, their internal priorities evolve. The things they value most begin to change. They may become more interested in peace than in competition, more focused on understanding than on judgment, more curious about meaning than about status. These changes influence how they interact with others. Conversations that once felt exciting may begin to feel repetitive. Situations that once created drama may begin to feel unnecessary. The person may notice that certain environments trigger restlessness instead of joy. This awareness can lead to subtle adjustments. They may spend less time in places that feel misaligned with their growth. They may seek quieter spaces for reflection. They may look for relationships that support deeper conversations. From the outside, these changes can be misunderstood. Some people may assume that the person is becoming distant or uninterested. Others may interpret the shift as rejection. But in many cases, the change has nothing to do with rejecting people. It has to do with aligning life with evolving awareness. Buddhist philosophy encourages people to observe these changes with patience rather than fear. The teachings remind us that attachment to permanence often creates unnecessary suffering. When we expect every relationship to remain exactly the same, we resist the natural flow of life. But relationships, like all living processes, move through cycles. Some connections enter your life for a specific period of growth. They provide companionship, support, and shared experiences that help shape your understanding. During that time, the relationship serves an important role. Then life continues moving. The lessons that were once exchanged may no longer be the primary focus of the path ahead. When this happens, the connection may change form. Sometimes the relationship becomes less frequent but remains meaningful. Sometimes it gradually fades as each person follows a different direction. Both outcomes can occur without hostility. In fact, one of the insights that Buddhist teachings encourage is learning to appreciate the role that each relationship played without forcing it to remain unchanged. When you begin to see relationships through this lens, the fear of losing connections begins to soften. You realize that growth is not about abandoning people. It is about allowing each connection to evolve naturally according to the paths of the individuals involved. Some relationships grow stronger because both people are exploring similar questions. When two individuals develop awareness at similar stages, their conversations deepen. They support each other's growth, offering reflection and encouragement. These relationships often feel energizing because they move in the same direction. Other relationships remain meaningful but change in tone. You may still care deeply about someone, even if your daily interactions become less frequent. The bond may shift from constant companionship to quiet respect, and some relationships simply complete their chapter. There is no anger, no conflict, just a recognition that both individuals are continuing their journeys in different ways. Accepting these changes requires emotional maturity. It means allowing people the freedom to follow their own paths without trying to control the direction of their growth. Just as your awareness is evolving according to your experiences, others are responding to their own lessons. Everyone moves at a different pace. Some people may not feel drawn toward the same questions that now guide your thinking. They may remain comfortable within patterns that you have outgrown. Their choices reflect the stage of life they are currently experiencing, and that is perfectly natural. When this understanding becomes clear, relationships can be approached with greater compassion. Instead of expecting others to mirror your transformation, you learn to appreciate the unique journey each person is living. This perspective reduces conflict. Rather than forcing conversations into alignment, you allow space for differences. You respect the fact that not every relationship must revolve around the same interests or insights. At the same time, you remain honest about your own direction. Growth requires authenticity. Pretending to remain the same person in order to preserve relationships can create internal tension. When the mind evolves but behavior remains trapped in old patterns, the result is discomfort. True connection requires honesty. This does not mean abruptly abandoning people or dismissing their perspectives. It simply means allowing your life to reflect the awareness you are developing. Sometimes this authenticity inspires others. When people observe genuine growth, they may become curious about the changes they see. Your calmness, clarity, and patience may encourage reflection within them as well. But this influence happens naturally. It cannot be forced. The most meaningful way to support others is often to quietly live according to the understanding you have discovered. Over time, your relationships will naturally align with the person you are becoming. Some will deepen, some will transform, some will fade. Yet none of these outcomes diminish the value of the journey you have shared. Each connection leaves an imprint on your life. Each person contributes something to your understanding, even if that contribution lasts for only a certain period of time. When growth reshapes relationships, it is not removing meaning from your life. It is simply rearranging the landscape through which your path continues to unfold. When relationships begin to change as the mind evolves, a quiet understanding slowly forms. Some connections deepen because both people grow in similar directions. Others gently shift as life pulls each person toward different experiences. At first, these changes can feel confusing, even painful. Yet, over time, something important begins to reveal itself. Not every relationship was meant to follow you through every stage of your life. This realization opens the door to another truth that many people eventually discover. Not everyone is meant to walk your entire journey. There is a quiet pattern in human life that often goes unnoticed until much later. People enter our lives at different moments, bringing with them certain lessons, influences, and experiences. Some remain close for many years, others appear only briefly, yet even the shortest connections can leave lasting impressions. When looking back on life, it becomes clear that different people were present during different chapters. Childhood brings certain companions who share early memories and simple adventures. School introduces friendships built around learning, exploration, and shared discovery. Later stages of life create new connections based on work, family, interests, or personal growth. Each stage carries its own circle of relationships. Yet it is rare for every person from every stage to remain present forever. Many people struggle with this reality because they assume that meaningful relationships must last a lifetime in order to have value. When someone slowly drifts away from the path they are walking, the mind may interpret this as loss or failure. But Buddhist wisdom encourages a different perspective. Some people are companions for a season, not a lifetime. This does not reduce the importance of the time shared. Instead, it highlights the natural rhythm of human connections. Just as seasons change in nature, relationships move through cycles that reflect the conditions of each person's life. Some connections arrive during moments when we are learning particular lessons. A friend may appear during a period of exploration, encouraging curiosity and creativity. Another person may enter during a difficult time, offering support when strength feels limited. Someone else may become part of our life while we are discovering new directions, helping us see possibilities we had not considered before. These individuals play meaningful roles, yet once those lessons have been learned, the relationship may naturally shift. This does not mean the connection lacked depth or sincerity. It simply means the conditions that brought the two people together have changed. The journey continues, and each person moves toward the next chapter of their life. Buddhism often describes life as a continuous flow of conditions arising and passing away. Nothing remains completely fixed. Experiences change, circumstances evolve, and people move through different stages of awareness. Relationships are part of this same movement. Holding tightly to the idea that every connection must remain unchanged can create unnecessary suffering. When someone expects permanence from something that naturally evolves, disappointment becomes inevitable. But when relationships are understood as part of the flow of life, the perspective changes. Instead of clinging to the idea that someone must remain present forever, it becomes possible to appreciate the time shared without resisting the changes that follow. This awareness allows gratitude to replace attachment. A person can look back at a friendship or relationship and recognize the role it played without demanding that it continue exactly as before. The experiences shared, the conversations held, and the lessons exchanged all remain valuable, even if the paths eventually separate. Sometimes relationships change simply because life circumstances evolve. People move to different places, careers shift, family responsibilities grow. The routines that once brought two people together may disappear as life takes new directions. In these situations, distance develops quietly. The connection does not necessarily end with conflict or disagreement. Instead, the rhythm of daily life slowly moves each person toward different environments. Other times, relationships change because personal growth creates new priorities. As awareness deepens, interests begin to shift. A person who once focused on social approval may begin exploring inner peace. Someone who once valued competition may start seeking balance and understanding. These changes influence how time is spent and what conversations feel meaningful. When two individuals grow in very different directions, maintaining the same level of closeness can become difficult. The connection may still contain respect and care, but the shared focus that once brought them together may no longer exist. This situation often creates mixed emotions. Part of the mind may want to preserve the relationship exactly as it once was. Memories of laughter, support, and companionship can create a strong sense of attachment. Yet the reality of the present moment may reveal that the paths are no longer aligned. Accepting this change requires emotional wisdom. It means allowing people the freedom to follow their own direction without forcing them to remain on a path that no longer fits their experience. Just as you are responding to your own growth, others are responding to the lessons unfolding in their lives. Each person is walking through their own journey. Buddhist teachings encourage compassion toward this process. Instead of viewing the end of a close phase in a relationship as a failure, it can be seen as a natural completion of a chapter. The connection served its purpose during the time it existed. The conversations, experiences, and support shared during that period helped shape the understanding of both individuals. Even if the relationship changes form, its influence continues through the memories and lessons it created. In many cases, relationships do not disappear entirely. They simply transform. Two people who once spoke daily may begin speaking only occasionally. The closeness may become quieter, less intense, but still respectful. The bond remains, even though the daily interaction has changed. This transformation reflects the evolving nature of life. It allows both individuals to continue growing without feeling trapped by expectations of permanence. Sometimes people fear this idea because they associate it with loneliness. But understanding that not everyone is meant to walk your entire journey does not mean you will walk alone forever. It simply means that different companions appear during different stages of the path. As your life continues unfolding, new connections may emerge. People who resonate with your current stage of growth may enter your life naturally. These relationships often feel different because they arise from the understanding you have developed. Conversations may become deeper. Shared interests may revolve around awareness, reflection, or purpose. These new connections are not replacements for earlier ones. They are simply part of the ongoing movement of life. Each relationship contributes something unique. Some provide laughter and lightness. Others encourage introspection. Some offer guidance, while others offer companionship during difficult moments. Together, these relationships create the network of experiences that shape a person's journey. When viewed from this perspective, the arrival and departure of different companions becomes easier to accept. Instead of fearing change, a person learns to appreciate the role each connection plays. They recognize that every relationship, whether brief or lasting, carries meaning. The key is learning to hold these connections with care rather than attachment. Care allows appreciation without clinging. Attachment, on the other hand, demands permanence and resists the natural movement of life. By letting go of the expectation that every companion must remain forever, relationships become lighter. The pressure to maintain something beyond its natural course begins to fade. This does not reduce the importance of love or friendship. In fact, it can deepen them. When people are allowed to walk their paths freely, the connections that remain become more genuine. They are based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Each person chooses to remain present because the relationship continues to grow naturally. And when certain companions move on to different directions, the memories shared remain part of the journey. They become quiet reminders of the chapters that helped shape who you are. Life continues unfolding, and new experiences continue appearing along the path. Different companions will walk beside you during different moments. Some will stay for many years. Some will stay only briefly, but each one contributes something to the unfolding story of your life. And as you continue walking forward, understanding this truth allows you to do so with gratitude rather than regret. When it becomes clear that some companions walk beside us only for a season, a deeper calm begins to settle in the mind. The fear of losing people slowly softens because the journey is no longer measured by who stays or who leaves. Life begins to feel more like a path, unfolding step by step rather than a crowded road where everyone must remain together forever. Yet as this understanding deepens, another realization quietly appears. Even when the path is surrounded by people, the most important discoveries often happen in silence. This leads to another truth that many seekers eventually encounter. The path of inner clarity is often quiet and solitary. A curious pattern can be observed in human life. Many people search for answers in busy places. They look for guidance in loud opinions, social approval, and endless discussions. When confusion appears, the natural reaction is to ask others what to think, what to do, and which direction to follow. The world encourages this behavior. Advice flows constantly from every direction. Social media, friends, family, and public figures all offer opinions about how life should be lived. There are endless voices explaining what success looks like, what happiness should mean, and what decisions are considered correct. In the middle of this noise, something subtle is often overlooked. True understanding rarely grows in crowded spaces. Clarity tends to appear when the mind becomes quiet enough to observe itself. This is why the path toward deeper awareness often feels solitary. It requires moments when external voices fade, allowing the inner landscape to become visible. Buddhist teachings have emphasized this idea for centuries. The Buddha did not reach awakening through debate or public approval. He stepped away from the noise of society and spent long periods in reflection. During this time, he observed the workings of the mind directly. Instead of relying on inherited beliefs or external authority, he investigated the nature of suffering, attachment, and awareness within his own experience. This investigation happened in silence. The quiet environment allowed him to see patterns that would have been difficult to notice in a crowded world of constant conversation. Thoughts could be observed as they appeared and disappeared, Emotions could be examined without distraction. The deeper rhythms of the mind became visible. This process revealed something important. Understanding that arises from direct observation carries a different kind of strength. It does not depend on agreement from others because it has been discovered through personal experience. This is why inner clarity often develops in solitude. When a person spends time alone with their own thoughts, certain illusions begin to dissolve. The mind starts to notice habits that usually remain hidden. Patterns of worry, desire, and fear become easier to recognize when the surrounding environment is calm. In the beginning, this silence can feel uncomfortable. Many people are not used to being alone with their own minds. Without distractions, the stream of thoughts can feel overwhelming. Old memories may appear. Questions that were previously ignored may rise to the surface, but this discomfort is part of the process. It signals that the mind is beginning to observe itself more honestly. When a person continues to sit with this experience, something interesting begins to happen. The constant noise of thought gradually slows down. Instead of reacting to every idea or emotion, the mind learns to watch them pass like clouds moving across the sky. This observation creates space. Within that space, new insights begin to appear. A person may notice how certain desires create tension. They may see how attachment to expectations leads to disappointment. They may recognize how the mind constantly compares itself to others, searching for approval. These realizations often emerge quietly. No crowd announces them. No applause follows their arrival. Yet they transform the way life is experienced. Buddhism describes this transformation as the development of mindfulness and insight. Through careful observation of the mind, a person begins to see how suffering is created and how it can be released. This understanding cannot be fully given by someone else. Teachers can offer guidance, and books can provide inspiration. But the final realization must occur within one's own awareness. It happens when the mind directly sees the patterns shaping its experience. This is why inner clarity often requires solitude. Not because people must avoid relationships or withdraw from society entirely, but because certain insights can only appear when the mind is quiet enough to observe itself. The world often encourages constant activity. Phones vibrate with notifications. Conversations fill every pause. Entertainment surrounds every moment of boredom. These distractions create a continuous flow of stimulation that keeps the mind occupied. Yet beneath this stimulation, many people feel restless. They sense that something deeper is waiting to be understood. They feel the presence of questions that cannot be answered through surface-level explanations. When someone begins searching for these answers, they often feel drawn toward quieter spaces. It may start with small moments of reflection, sitting alone after a long day, walking in silence through nature, turning off distractions for a few minutes of stillness. During these moments, awareness begins to sharpen. Thoughts that once moved automatically now become visible. The mind notices how easily it becomes attached to praise or disturbed by criticism. It begins to observe how emotions rise and fall without permanent stability. These observations create the foundation of inner clarity. Instead of chasing answers from the outside world, the person begins exploring the workings of their own mind. They learn to watch reactions without immediately identifying with them. Over time, this practice reveals deeper insights. The person begins to see that many struggles come from resisting the natural flow of life. Expectations create tension. Attachment creates fear of loss. Comparison creates feelings of inadequacy. When these patterns become visible, the possibility of freedom appears. The mind starts to loosen its grip on thoughts that once seemed unquestionable. This freedom is not dramatic or loud. It appears quietly. A situation that once caused anger may now feel manageable. A criticism that once felt painful may now pass without leaving a lasting mark. The mind begins to respond with calmness rather than immediate reaction. These changes are signs of growing clarity. yet from the outside, they may not be obvious. Others may not notice the transformation immediately because it happens internally. This is another reason why the path can feel solitary. The most meaningful progress often occurs beneath the surface of everyday life. A person may continue participating in normal activities while experiencing profound shifts in perception. They still speak, work, and interact with others, but their relationship with their thoughts has changed. Instead of being controlled by every emotion or impulse, they observe these experiences with greater awareness. They recognize that thoughts are temporary events rather than permanent truths. This recognition creates peace. The mind becomes less reactive, less dependent on external approval, and more comfortable with uncertainty. Yet this peace rarely comes from crowds or public recognition. It grows through quiet reflection. Moments of solitude allow the mind to reconnect with itself. They provide the opportunity to examine beliefs and expectations without external pressure. This does not mean a person must live in isolation. Relationships and community remain important parts of life. Compassion, kindness, and shared experiences enrich human existence. But inner clarity develops when the mind learns to stand on its own understanding. It learns to listen to the quiet voice of awareness rather than the loud demands of social approval. This balance creates stability. A person can participate in the world while remaining connected to their inner clarity. They can listen to others without losing sight of their own observations. They can accept advice without becoming dependent on it. Their center remains steady, and that steadiness comes from the time they spent in silence. As this clarity deepens, solitude begins to feel less like loneliness and more like companionship with one's own awareness. The quiet moments that once felt empty become valuable. They provide space for reflection, understanding, and peace. Instead of fearing silence, the person begins to appreciate it. Within that silence, they discover something profound. The answers they were searching for in the outside world were quietly waiting within their own mind all along. When the mind begins discovering clarity in silence, something important slowly changes within the heart. The need to constantly explain yourself starts to fade. The urge to prove your path to everyone around you begins to loosen its grip. The quiet confidence that grows through inner understanding makes external approval feel less necessary. Yet even with this clarity, moments still appear when others misunderstand your choices. Some people may question your decisions. Others may judge the direction you have taken. A few may even criticize what they cannot fully see. In the past, these reactions might have triggered frustration. But as awareness deepens, another response becomes possible. Compassion replaces the need for approval. There is a stage in personal growth where the desire to be understood begins to transform into something gentler. Instead of fighting against other people's opinions, the mind begins to look at those opinions with curiosity. Instead of defending every choice, the heart begins to soften toward the people who disagree. This shift happens when a person recognizes something very simple yet powerful. Everyone is struggling with their own understanding of life. Every person carries their own fears, expectations, and beliefs. These internal patterns influence how they interpret the world and the people around them. When someone criticizes your path, they are often responding from their own experiences rather than from a full understanding of your journey. Their reaction reflects their perspective. This perspective may be shaped by their upbringing, their environment, and the lessons they have encountered so far. In many cases, their judgment is not meant to harm you. It is simply the result of their current view of the world. When this becomes clear, anger begins to lose its strength. Instead of feeling attacked, you begin to recognize that misunderstanding is part of the human condition. People see life through different lenses, and those lenses are shaped by countless factors beyond your control. This awareness opens the door to compassion. Compassion in Buddhism does not mean agreeing with everything someone says. It does not require abandoning your own understanding or allowing others to control your choices. Instead, compassion means recognizing the shared humanity behind every reaction. It means understanding that the person criticizing you is also navigating their own struggles. They may be protecting beliefs that give them a sense of security. They may be reacting to fears they have not yet examined. They may simply be trying to make sense of something unfamiliar. When someone encounters a path that challenges their expectations, confusion often appears first. That confusion may show itself as skepticism or criticism, but beneath the surface, the reaction often comes from uncertainty. Recognizing this can change the way you respond. Instead of trying to win an argument or convince someone to agree with you, the mind begins to step back. It sees the situation with greater patience. The need to defend every detail of your journey slowly fades. This does not mean you remain silent out of fear. It means you speak from calmness rather than from a need to be validated. When someone questions your path, you can share your perspective without insisting that they accept it. You allow the conversation to exist without forcing a particular outcome. And when understanding does not arrive, you simply let the moment pass. This ability to let go of the need for approval creates emotional freedom. Many conflicts in life arise because people are trying to control how others perceive them. They want their intentions to be recognized, their choices to be respected, and their beliefs to be accepted. When these expectations are not met, frustration appears. But when compassion replaces the need for approval, the entire dynamic changes. You no longer depend on others to confirm the value of your path. Your understanding stands on its own foundation. This independence allows you to wish others well, even when they disagree with you. The phrase, "wish others well," may sound simple, but it carries deep meaning within Buddhist teachings. It reflects the practice of loving kindness, often referred to as metta. Metta is the intention to extend goodwill toward all beings. This goodwill does not depend on whether someone supports your choices. It does not disappear when someone misunderstands you. Instead, it recognizes that every person desires happiness and freedom from suffering, even if they pursue those goals in different ways. When you respond to criticism with compassion, you break the cycle of conflict. The other person may expect anger or defensiveness. Instead, they encounter calmness. They may expect an argument. Instead, they receive understanding. This response can soften even the most tense situations. Sometimes it encourages reflection in the other person. When they realize that you are not reacting with hostility, they may begin to question their own assumptions. Other times, nothing changes externally. The person may continue holding their opinion. Yet even in those moments, compassion remains valuable, because compassion protects your own peace. When the mind stops fighting to be understood, it becomes lighter. The emotional energy once spent on defending your identity becomes available for awareness and kindness. You begin to see that not every misunderstanding requires resolution. Some differences simply exist. People are at different stages of understanding, responding to different experiences, and interpreting life through different perspectives. This diversity of views does not need to create hostility. It can simply be acknowledged. Buddhist philosophy often encourages practitioners to reflect on the universality of human suffering. Every person experiences pain, confusion, and uncertainty at some point in their life. Even those who criticize others are dealing with their own internal struggles. This recognition deepens compassion. Instead of seeing people as opponents who must be corrected, you begin to see them as fellow travelers navigating the complexities of existence. Their reactions become easier to understand. When someone judges your path harshly, they may be reacting to fears within themselves. Your choices may challenge beliefs that help them feel stable. By questioning those beliefs, you unintentionally disturb the framework they rely on. This disturbance can create defensive reactions. But those reactions are not truly about you. They are about the internal structure that person is trying to protect. Seeing this clearly reduces the desire to argue. Instead of fighting to change their perspective, you allow them to hold their view while continuing your own journey. At the same time, compassion reminds you that you are not completely separate from the people who misunderstand you. There was likely a time when you also held certain assumptions about life. There may have been moments when you judged others without fully understanding their experiences. Growth happens gradually. Just as your awareness has evolved, the awareness of others may also evolve in time. This recognition encourages patience. You no longer expect immediate understanding from everyone around you. Instead, you trust that each person will encounter their own lessons when the conditions are right. In the meantime, you focus on living your truth with kindness. Kindness does not weaken your path. In fact, it strengthens it. A person who responds to misunderstanding with compassion demonstrates a deeper form of strength than someone who reacts with anger. Calmness in the face of criticism shows that your clarity does not depend on external approval. It reveals that your peace is rooted in awareness rather than in validation. Over time, this approach influences the atmosphere around you. People begin to notice the difference in your reactions. Situations that once triggered conflict now unfold with greater calmness. Conversations become less confrontational because you are not trying to dominate them. This change creates space for mutual respect. Even when people disagree with your path, they may still appreciate the way you carry yourself. Your calmness communicates something more powerful than any argument. It shows that your understanding has become internal rather than performative. And within that calmness, compassion continues to grow. The more you recognize the struggles of others, the easier it becomes to wish them well. Even those who misunderstand you, even those who criticize your choices, because you understand that everyone is searching for their own form of peace. And sometimes the greatest expression of wisdom is simply allowing them to continue their search without resistance. When compassion begins replacing the need for approval, the mind becomes calmer in situations that once created tension. Criticism loses much of its power because the heart no longer depends on validation from others. Instead of reacting with frustration, you begin responding with patience and understanding. Yet, as this calm awareness grows, another pattern becomes easier to notice in the behavior of people around you. Many disagreements are not really about truth, they are about identity. This realization reveals another quiet truth about human behavior. Most people defend their identity, not truth. A subtle force shapes much of the way people think and react in everyday life. It is the sense of identity each person carries within their mind. Identity is the collection of beliefs, roles, and expectations that define how someone sees themselves. It includes ideas about what kind of person they are, what values they hold, and what place they occupy in the world. This sense of identity provides stability. It helps people navigate life by giving them a clear picture of who they believe themselves to be. Someone may identify as a professional, a parent, a believer in certain traditions, or a follower of specific cultural values. These identities form the foundation of how they interpret experiences. But identity also has another side, because when a person strongly identifies with a particular belief or role, any challenge to that belief can feel like a threat to their sense of self. This reaction often happens unconsciously. When someone encounters an idea that contradicts their identity, the mind may immediately reject it. The reaction is not always based on careful examination of the idea itself. Instead, the mind is protecting the identity it has built over time. This is why discussions about beliefs can become emotional very quickly. A person may feel that accepting a new perspective would require them to question parts of their identity. That possibility can feel uncomfortable or even frightening. In response, the mind defends its current position with strong certainty. From the outside, this can look like a defense of truth, but in many cases it is actually a defense of identity. Buddhist teachings have explored this pattern for centuries. The concept of self in Buddhism is examined carefully because the mind tends to cling to fixed identities. People build stories about who they are and how the world works, and these stories become deeply embedded in their thinking. Once these stories solidify, the mind begins protecting them. Any information that supports the identity is welcomed. Information that challenges it is often dismissed. This selective perception creates a powerful psychological shield. The person feels as though they are defending truth, yet in reality, they may simply be defending the identity built around their beliefs. This pattern becomes especially visible when someone steps outside social expectations. Society operates through shared norms. These norms define what behaviors are considered normal, respectable, or successful. People grow up learning these expectations through family, culture, education, and media. Over time, these expectations become deeply familiar. Most people follow them without questioning their origin. The path they provide feels safe because it aligns with the behavior of the majority. But when someone chooses a different direction, confusion can arise. A person who steps outside familiar patterns challenges the assumptions that others rely on. Their choices raise questions about whether the accepted path is the only one available. For some observers, this situation can feel uncomfortable. If someone else finds meaning in a different way of living, it may cause others to reflect on their own decisions. They may begin to wonder whether they are following their path out of genuine understanding or simply because it is expected. Instead of exploring that question, the mind may react defensively. It protects the identity built around social expectations. This reaction can appear in many forms. Some people respond with criticism. They may label the person who is different as unrealistic, naive, or rebellious. Others may dismiss the path entirely, claiming that it will lead to failure. In both cases, the response serves the same purpose. It reinforces the belief that the familiar identity remains correct. Buddhist philosophy encourages people to observe this process carefully. It teaches that identity is not a fixed essence, but a collection of mental constructions. These constructions change over time as experiences and insights reshape the mind. Clinging to identity creates tension. When the mind becomes attached to a particular image of itself, it must constantly defend that image against any challenge. This defense can create conflict with others who live differently. The person who steps outside expectations becomes a mirror. Their choices reflect the possibility that identity might be more flexible than it appears. For someone deeply attached to a particular identity, this possibility can feel unsettling. Instead of examining the reflection, the mind may attempt to reject it. This rejection is rarely personal. It is a psychological defense mechanism designed to protect the stability of the self-image. Understanding this can change the way you interpret other people's reactions. When someone strongly criticizes your path, it may not be because your choices are truly threatening. More often, your choices challenge the assumptions that support their identity. Your independence may highlight the possibility that life can be lived differently, and that possibility can create uncertainty for those who have built their sense of security around familiar patterns. Recognizing this pattern helps reduce the emotional weight of criticism. Instead of seeing hostility as a personal attack, you begin to see it as a defense of identity. The person reacting strongly may simply be protecting the worldview that makes them feel stable. This realization encourages patience. When someone is defending their identity, logical arguments rarely change their perspective immediately. Their reaction is not purely intellectual. It is tied to deeper emotional attachments. Trying to force understanding can sometimes strengthen their resistance. Instead, a calmer approach becomes more effective. By remaining steady in your own awareness, you demonstrate that stepping outside expectations does not necessarily lead to chaos or failure. Your calmness becomes a quiet example of another possibility. Over time, this example may soften the rigidity of their assumptions, or it may not. Both outcomes are possible. But your responsibility is not to dismantle someone else's identity. Each person must examine their own beliefs when they are ready. Your responsibility is simply to live with clarity. Clarity means recognizing when someone's reaction is rooted in identity rather than in genuine curiosity. When you see this clearly, you stop taking their criticism personally. You understand that their reaction belongs to their journey. This awareness also invites humility. Just as others defend their identities, you may also hold beliefs that feel central to your sense of self. The process of growth involves examining these attachments carefully. Buddhist practice encourages people to observe their own identities with honesty. Instead of clinging to labels and roles, the mind learns to see them as temporary constructs. They serve practical purposes in daily life, but they do not define the deeper nature of awareness. This perspective creates freedom. When identity becomes less rigid, the mind becomes more open to new understanding. It can examine ideas without feeling threatened by them. It can explore perspectives without losing its sense of stability. This openness is the opposite of the defensive reactions that arise when identity feels fragile. By cultivating awareness of identity, you develop compassion for those who are still strongly attached to theirs. You recognize that their defensiveness is not a sign of weakness. It is simply part of the human experience. Everyone begins their journey with certain assumptions about who they are and how the world works. Over time, those assumptions may evolve as new insights appear. But the process unfolds at different speeds for different people. Some may question their identities early in life. Others may hold on to them for many years before feeling ready to explore deeper questions. Understanding this variety helps you remain patient. You no longer expect everyone to immediately recognize the truth you have discovered. Instead, you allow people the time and space to explore their own beliefs. Meanwhile, you continue walking your path with calmness. You understand that stepping outside social expectations will inevitably create confusion for some observers. Their reactions are part of the natural tension between identity and change. But clarity does not require universal agreement. It only requires honesty with yourself. And when that honesty becomes steady, the noise of confusion around you loses its power to disturb your peace. When it becomes clear that many people defend their identity rather than searching for truth, another realization slowly follows. The confusion you encounter from others begins to make more sense. Their reactions are not always based on understanding the path you are walking. Often, they are responding to something that simply looks unfamiliar. This brings us to another quiet truth about personal transformation. Inner clarity often looks strange from the outside. A curious pattern appears whenever someone begins seeing life differently. From within, the experience can feel calm, meaningful, and deeply aligned. The person senses that something important is shifting inside their mind. Old patterns of thinking begin to loosen. Priorities start rearranging themselves. The desire to chase certain things fades, while the interest in deeper understanding grows stronger. Yet from the outside, these same changes may look confusing. Observers might struggle to interpret what they are seeing. The person who once followed familiar expectations may suddenly start asking unusual questions. They may become less interested in competition, status, or approval. They may prefer quiet reflection over constant activity. To someone watching from the outside, these changes can appear puzzling. Friends may ask why you are behaving differently. Family members might wonder if something is wrong. Some people may even assume that you are lost or uncertain about your direction. But in many cases, the opposite is happening. What appears as confusion from the outside can actually be the beginning of awakening. Buddhist teachings often describe awakening as a process of seeing reality more clearly. This clarity develops when the mind begins observing the patterns that shape everyday life. Many of these patterns are so deeply embedded that people rarely question them. Society encourages certain definitions of success. Achievement, recognition, financial security, and social approval are often presented as the ultimate goals. From a young age, people are taught that pursuing these goals will bring happiness and stability. Because these expectations are widely shared, they become normal. Most people follow them without questioning whether they truly lead to lasting peace. The path feels obvious because it is reinforced by culture, family, and tradition. But when someone begins examining these assumptions closely, the picture can start to change. They may notice that external success does not always bring fulfillment. They may observe that people who appear to have everything are still struggling internally. They may recognize how quickly satisfaction fades when it depends entirely on achievements. These observations can trigger deeper questions. If success alone cannot guarantee peace, then what truly creates a meaningful life? If approval from others is temporary, why does the mind chase it so intensely? If everything in life changes constantly, what can truly provide stability? These questions are often the beginning of awakening. Yet from the outside, the process may look unusual. The person who is awakening may start stepping away from certain patterns. They may spend more time reflecting, reading, meditating, or observing their thoughts. They may lose interest in activities that once felt essential. To observers who are still immersed in familiar routines, this shift may appear confusing. They may interpret the change as uncertainty or rebellion. They may think the person is abandoning common sense or rejecting practical responsibilities. But what they are witnessing is often a deeper form of clarity emerging. When someone begins seeing the nature of attachment, desire, and suffering more clearly, their priorities naturally shift. Activities that once seemed important may no longer carry the same weight. The mind begins searching for something more stable than external validation. This search can feel quiet and personal. Unlike achievements that receive public recognition, inner clarity develops gradually within the mind. There are no trophies or visible milestones. The transformation happens through small realizations that accumulate over time. A person may notice that reacting with anger only creates more suffering. They may discover that holding on to resentment drains their energy. They may observe that chasing approval keeps them trapped in endless comparison. These insights reshape behavior. Instead of reacting automatically, the mind begins pausing before responding. Instead of chasing every desire, the person learns to observe cravings without immediately acting on them. From the outside, these changes may appear subtle, yet they represent a profound shift in awareness. This is why awakening often looks unusual to those who have not experienced it themselves. The changes are happening internally, in ways that cannot always be explained through ordinary conversation. Language struggles to capture the full depth of these realizations. Someone might try to describe the peace they feel when they stop chasing external validation. They may attempt to explain the freedom that comes from understanding impermanence. But unless the listener has experienced similar insights, the explanation may seem abstract or impractical. The listener may respond with confusion. They may believe the person is overthinking life or distancing themselves from reality, but in truth the person is often becoming more aware of reality than before. Buddhist philosophy teaches that much of human suffering arises from misunderstanding the nature of existence. People cling to things that cannot remain permanent. They chase happiness through conditions that inevitably change. Awakening begins when the mind starts seeing these patterns clearly. This recognition changes how life is approached. Instead of clinging tightly to outcomes, the person learns to accept change with greater calmness. Instead of measuring worth through comparison, they begin valuing awareness itself. These shifts create a new way of living. Yet because this way of living differs from common expectations, it can appear strange to others. Someone who chooses simplicity over status may be misunderstood by those who equate success with accumulation. A person who values quiet reflection may seem distant to those who thrive on constant activity. The difference in perspective creates confusion, but confusion from others does not invalidate the clarity you are discovering. In many cases, the greatest transformations look unusual at first. History offers many examples of individuals whose insights were initially misunderstood. Philosophers, scientists, and spiritual teachers have often faced skepticism because their ideas challenged familiar assumptions. Over time, some of those ideas became widely accepted, but during the early stages, they appeared strange to those who were comfortable with existing beliefs. Personal awakening follows a similar pattern. The insights that reshape your life may not immediately make sense to others. They may require experiences and reflections that the observer has not yet encountered. This gap in experience creates misunderstanding. Yet the purpose of awakening is not to impress others or gain their approval. Its purpose is to free the mind from unnecessary suffering. When the mind begins to recognize the impermanent nature of life, it becomes less attached to temporary conditions. It stops demanding that the world behave according to rigid expectations. This flexibility brings peace. The person who experiences this peace may appear calmer in situations that once created stress. They may remain composed when others react with frustration. They may respond to challenges with patience rather than panic. To someone observing from the outside, this calmness can seem puzzling. They may wonder why the person is not reacting in the expected way, but the reason lies in the clarity that has developed within. The person has begun to see that many reactions are unnecessary. They recognize that emotions rise and fall naturally when they are not constantly fed by attachment. This understanding changes how they move through the world. They become less concerned with proving themselves. They spend less energy chasing approval. Instead, they focus on cultivating awareness and compassion. These priorities may appear unusual in a society that often rewards competition and status, but the person walking this path understands something deeper. Peace cannot be built on constant comparison. It grows from understanding the nature of the mind itself. As this understanding continues developing, the person becomes more comfortable with the fact that others may not immediately understand their choices. They recognize that awakening is an internal process. Just as their own insights unfolded gradually, others may discover similar truths at different times. There is no need to force agreement. The path of awakening is not about convincing others. It is about living with clarity and compassion. Over time, the calmness that comes from inner clarity may quietly influence those around you. People may notice the steadiness in your behavior. They may observe the patience with which you respond to challenges. Some may become curious about the source of that calmness. But even if they do not, the clarity remains valuable because it changes the way you experience life. The confusion others see from the outside does not diminish the peace you are discovering within. In fact, it often confirms that something meaningful is happening. The mind is beginning to wake up. When inner clarity begins to grow, something else quietly changes in the way you move through life. The confusion others feel about your choices slowly loses its power to disturb you. You begin to understand that awakening is an internal process, one that cannot always be translated into simple explanations. The peace you are discovering does not come from convincing others that your path makes sense. It comes from walking it with honesty, and this realization opens the door to another important truth. You don't need to explain every step of your path. There is a subtle pressure that many people carry without even noticing it. It is the feeling that every decision must be justified, every change must be defended, every shift in direction must come with a clear explanation that satisfies the expectations of others. From childhood, people are often trained to give reasons for everything they do. Parents ask why a choice was made. Teachers expect answers that follow certain rules. Society rewards behavior that can be easily explained within accepted standards. Over time, this habit becomes automatic. When someone takes a step that others do not understand, the mind may immediately begin searching for explanations. It prepares arguments, gathers reasons, and tries to organize thoughts in a way that will convince others that the decision is valid. This reaction feels natural, but it can also become exhausting, because not every journey can be explained in simple words. Some paths unfold through experiences that cannot be fully described. They are shaped by quiet realizations, subtle observations, and personal insights that develop slowly within the mind. These inner movements do not always translate easily into language. A person might feel a deep pull toward a different way of living without being able to list every reason for it. They may sense that a certain direction brings peace, even if others cannot see why. When this happens, the pressure to explain can create unnecessary tension. The person may feel responsible for making their journey understandable to everyone around them. They may worry that silence will be interpreted as confusion or weakness. But Buddhist wisdom offers a different perspective. Not every step on the path needs to be explained. Some journeys are meant to be lived rather than described. This does not mean that communication is unimportant. Sharing thoughts and experiences can create meaningful connection. Conversations can help others learn from your perspective. But there is a difference between sharing and defending. Sharing comes from openness. Defending comes from pressure. When a person feels that every decision must be justified, the journey becomes burdened with constant explanation. Instead of walking forward freely, they spend energy managing how their path appears to others. This dynamic often arises when someone begins exploring a direction that differs from social expectations. Perhaps they choose simplicity instead of pursuing status. Perhaps they begin focusing on inner awareness instead of external recognition. Perhaps they decide to step away from patterns that once felt normal. These choices can raise questions. Friends and family may ask why the change happened. Some questions may come from genuine curiosity. Others may come from confusion or concern. At first, the person may try to explain everything. They describe the insights that influenced their decision. They talk about the experiences that reshaped their thinking. They try to translate internal clarity into words that others can understand. Sometimes these explanations help, but often they reveal something unexpected. No matter how carefully the journey is described, some people still cannot fully understand it. This happens because understanding depends on shared experience. If someone has not encountered the same questions or realizations, the explanation may remain abstract. The words may sound interesting, but they do not carry the same meaning as they do for the person who lived the experience. This gap between experience and explanation can create frustration. The person speaking may feel that they are not being heard. The person listening may feel confused by ideas that seem unfamiliar. Over time, a new realization begins to appear. Not everything needs to be translated into language. Some insights are meant to guide the way you live rather than the way you argue. The Buddha himself often taught through direct experience rather than lengthy explanations. Many of his teachings encouraged individuals to observe their own minds rather than rely entirely on intellectual understanding. This approach highlights an important principle. True understanding grows through observation and practice. It does not depend entirely on words. A person can read about peace in many books, but they only understand it fully when they experience calmness within their own mind. Someone can hear explanations about letting go of attachment, but the meaning becomes real only when they see the suffering that attachment creates. Because of this, certain journeys cannot be fully explained to others. They must be experienced personally. When a person accepts this truth, something liberating happens. The pressure to constantly justify their path begins to fade. Instead of rehearsing explanations for every decision, they allow their actions to reflect their understanding. Their life becomes the expression of their insight. This shift creates a quieter form of communication. People may still ask questions, and the person may still share what they have learned, but they no longer feel responsible for convincing everyone that their path is correct. They speak when it feels natural, and they remain silent when words are unnecessary. This silence is not avoidance, it is simply recognition that some journeys are better understood through observation than through explanation. Over time, others may begin to notice the changes that accompany inner clarity. They may observe the calmness in difficult situations. They may see the patience with which the person responds to challenges. These qualities communicate something deeper than words. They reveal that the path being walked has real meaning. When someone lives according to their understanding, their behavior becomes the most powerful explanation of their journey. Actions show the results of inner clarity. If a person has learned to let go of resentment, their kindness becomes visible. If they have discovered the peace that comes from simplicity, their lifestyle reflects that calmness. These expressions require no lengthy arguments. They simply demonstrate the impact of the path being followed. In many cases, this quiet example influences others more than explanations ever could. Someone who sees the calmness of another person may begin to wonder how that peace developed. Curiosity arises naturally when people observe a different way of living. At that point, conversations may become more meaningful, but even then, the goal is not to persuade. It is simply to share what has been discovered. Whether the other person understands immediately or not becomes less important. The journey continues regardless. Learning that you do not need to explain every step of your path brings a sense of freedom. It allows you to focus on living rather than performing. Instead of worrying about how your choices appear, you concentrate on aligning them with your awareness. This alignment becomes the foundation of authenticity. When actions and understanding move together, life feels less complicated. There is no need to maintain a separate image for the approval of others. Your path speaks for itself. And those who are ready to understand will see its meaning through the way you live. When the pressure to explain every step of your path begins to fade, a different kind of freedom quietly appears. Life starts to feel less like a performance for others and more like a personal journey unfolding at its own pace. You begin walking with a calmer mind, no longer trying to prove that your choices make sense to everyone around you. Yet, as this freedom grows, another subtle obstacle becomes easier to notice. Even when you stop explaining yourself to others, the mind can still fall into a different trap. It begins comparing, and comparison has a quiet way of disturbing the peace that clarity is trying to build. This brings us to another important truth. Comparison destroys peace. There is a habit deeply rooted in human thinking that often goes unnoticed. It is the tendency to measure life by looking at someone else's path. The mind observes where others are, what they have achieved, how they live, and then it begins making silent judgments. Sometimes those judgments create feelings of pride. Other times they create feelings of inadequacy, but in both cases the mind moves away from peace. Comparison begins early in life. Children are compared in school, ranked by grades, abilities, and behavior. Later in life, the comparisons become more complex. People compare careers, income, relationships, achievements, appearance, and even happiness. This constant measuring shapes the way many people see themselves. Instead of experiencing life directly, they view their journey through the lens of how it looks compared to someone else's. Social environments reinforce this habit. Modern culture often presents success as a competition. Stories highlight the fastest, the richest, the most admired. The attention given to these examples creates the impression that life is a race where everyone must keep up with one another. But when the mind accepts this view, something important is lost. It forgets that each life carries a completely different set of circumstances. Buddhist wisdom offers a powerful reminder about this truth. Every person walks with different karma. This does not simply refer to fate or destiny. It refers to the unique combination of experiences, actions, conditions, and lessons that shape each individual's path. No two journeys unfold in exactly the same way. Some people encounter certain challenges early in life. Others may face them much later. Some people are drawn toward reflection and inner development, while others spend years exploring the outer world before turning inward. These differences are not mistakes. They are part of the diversity of human experience. Yet comparison ignores this complexity. When the mind compares, it reduces life to a simple measurement. It looks at visible outcomes without understanding the deeper lessons behind them. It sees someone's success but does not see the struggles that shaped that success. It sees someone's stability but does not see the doubts they overcame along the way. This incomplete view creates illusions. A person may believe that someone else's life is easier, more meaningful, or more successful. They may feel that their own path is falling behind simply because it looks different. These thoughts create tension. Instead of appreciating the lessons unfolding in their own experience, the person becomes preoccupied with how their life appears relative to others. Peace begins to fade. The mind becomes restless, always looking sideways instead of looking inward. Buddhist teachings encourage a different way of seeing. Instead of comparing paths, the mind learns to observe them with understanding. Each life is recognized as a unique journey shaped by countless conditions. The goal is not to replicate someone else's experience, but to learn from the lessons appearing within your own. This perspective restores balance. When comparison fades, appreciation begins to grow. You start noticing the value of the experiences shaping your own awareness. Even challenges that once felt unfair begin to reveal their role in the development of wisdom and resilience. Every difficulty carries the possibility of insight. Every obstacle contains a lesson that cannot be learned through comfort alone. When you stop comparing your journey to someone else's, these lessons become clearer. You begin recognizing that life is not a competition, but a process of learning. Each person encounters situations that teach them something important about themselves and about the nature of the world. Some lessons involve patience, others involve letting go, some require courage, others require compassion. These lessons cannot be rushed. They appear when the conditions are right for them to be understood. Comparison interferes with this process. When the mind focuses on where someone else is in their journey, it stops paying attention to the lessons unfolding in its own experience. It begins chasing outcomes instead of cultivating awareness. This shift leads to dissatisfaction. Even when something positive happens, the mind may still feel incomplete if someone else appears to have achieved more. This endless measuring prevents contentment. But when comparison dissolves, a different experience emerges. The mind begins to accept its own pace of growth. Instead of asking whether life looks impressive to others, it asks whether the present moment is being lived with awareness. This question changes everything. Success is no longer measured by external milestones alone. It becomes connected to the development of understanding, kindness, and clarity. These qualities grow gradually. They cannot be forced through competition. They develop through reflection, patience, and attention to the present moment. Buddhist practice often emphasizes the importance of mindfulness in overcoming comparison. Mindfulness trains the mind to observe thoughts without immediately identifying with them. When a comparison appears, mindfulness notices it. The thought might say, "Someone else is doing better," or "My life should look different by now." Instead of following that thought automatically, the mind pauses. It sees the comparison as a mental habit rather than as an objective truth. This pause creates freedom. The person can acknowledge the thought without letting it control their emotional state. They recognize that the comparison does not define their worth or the value of their journey. Gradually, the mind learns to return to the present moment. Instead of measuring life against external examples, it focuses on what is actually happening right now. This attention brings peace. The present moment becomes enough. The mind appreciates the small details that once went unnoticed. Conversations, quiet moments, personal growth, and acts of kindness begin to feel meaningful in their own right. These experiences do not need to be compared to anyone else's life. They simply belong to the unfolding of your own path. As this understanding deepens, the relationship with others also changes. Instead of seeing people as competitors, you begin seeing them as fellow travelers. Their successes no longer threaten your peace because you recognize that their journey is separate from yours. You can celebrate their achievements without feeling diminished. You can appreciate their progress while remaining grounded in your own. This shift transforms relationships. Comparison often creates jealousy, insecurity, and silent resentment. When those patterns dissolve, connection becomes more genuine. You interact with others without the pressure to measure yourself against them. Their experiences become opportunities for learning rather than benchmarks for competition. This openness creates harmony. The mind becomes less defensive and more compassionate. It recognizes that everyone is navigating their own challenges, even when those challenges are not immediately visible. Everyone is learning different lessons. Some lessons involve success, others involve loss. Some involve discovering inner peace, others involve overcoming fear. Each lesson contributes to the evolution of awareness. Understanding this truth restores humility. It reminds you that life cannot be reduced to simple comparisons. The depth of a person's journey cannot be measured by external achievements alone. It is shaped by the insights gained along the way. When comparison disappears, gratitude begins to grow. The mind starts appreciating the experiences that once felt ordinary. It recognizes the value of growth that happens quietly, away from public attention. Peace returns. Because the mind is no longer chasing someone else's life, it is fully present in its own. When comparison slowly loses its hold on the mind, something quiet but powerful begins to change inside. Life no longer feels like a race where every step must be measured against someone else's progress. The tension that once came from constantly looking sideways begins to dissolve. You start noticing that peace grows when the mind stops measuring itself against the lives of others. Yet even after comparison fades, another invisible habit can still disturb the mind, the habit of performing for the approval of others. Many people spend years shaping their behavior according to what they believe others expect. They adjust their words, their choices, and sometimes even their dreams so that they appear acceptable to the people around them. Without realizing it, they begin living inside an invisible stage where every action is part of a performance. And this brings us to another quiet truth. Freedom begins when misunderstanding stops bothering you. There is a subtle pressure that exists in almost every social environment. It is the feeling that people must present themselves in a way that makes sense to others. Society often rewards those who follow familiar paths and punishes those who move differently. Because of this, many individuals develop the habit of shaping their identity according to external expectations. They begin asking silent questions. Will people approve of this decision? Will others understand what I am doing? Will this make me look successful, responsible, or respectable? These questions seem harmless at first, but over time, they begin to control the way a person lives. Instead of making choices based on inner clarity, decisions become influenced by the desire to be understood and accepted. This dynamic turns life into a performance. The person carefully manages how they appear to others. They explain their actions in ways that align with social expectations. They hide doubts, struggles, or unconventional ideas that might confuse people around them. On the surface, everything may look stable, but beneath that surface, the mind often feels restless. This restlessness appears because the person is constantly monitoring how they are perceived. Every misunderstanding feels like a threat. Every criticism feels like a failure. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle of trying to control how others interpret its actions. Buddhist wisdom invites a different perspective. It suggests that peace becomes possible when the need to control other people's perceptions begins to fade. This shift happens gradually. At first, a person may notice how much energy is spent trying to be understood. They might realize that certain explanations are repeated over and over, yet some people still remain confused. They begin asking themselves a simple question. Is it truly possible to control how every person interprets my life? The honest answer is usually no. Each individual views the world through their own experiences, beliefs, and expectations. Two people can witness the same event and interpret it in completely different ways. Their conclusions are shaped by their own understanding rather than by the intention of the person they are observing. Because of this, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. No matter how clearly someone speaks, there will always be people who interpret the message differently. Some will see wisdom where others see foolishness. Some will see courage where others see irresponsibility. This diversity of perception is part of human life. Trying to eliminate it completely creates unnecessary struggle. When the mind recognizes this truth, something important begins to relax. The person stops expecting universal understanding. They realize that misunderstanding does not necessarily mean something is wrong. It simply means that different people see reality from different angles. This realization creates space. Instead of reacting emotionally to every misunderstanding, the mind learns to observe it with calmness. Someone might question your choices or misinterpret your intentions, but the reaction no longer shakes your sense of direction. You understand that their interpretation belongs to their perspective. It does not define your path. This shift removes the pressure to perform. When you stop trying to manage every perception, life becomes simpler. Your actions no longer need to be carefully arranged to satisfy everyone watching. You begin living more naturally. Decisions are guided by clarity rather than by approval. Words are spoken honestly instead of strategically. The energy once spent on maintaining an image becomes available for awareness and compassion. This change feels liberating. The mind no longer feels trapped inside the invisible stage of social performance. Instead of acting for an audience, you move through life with authenticity. Authenticity does not mean ignoring others or refusing to listen to feedback. It simply means that your actions are rooted in understanding rather than in fear of judgment. When someone offers thoughtful advice, you can consider it openly. When someone misunderstands you, you can acknowledge it without becoming defensive. This balance creates emotional stability. Criticism loses much of its power because your sense of worth no longer depends on the approval of others. Praise also loses its ability to inflate the ego because you recognize that compliments are interpretations rather than absolute truths. Both praise and criticism become temporary waves in the ocean of social interaction. They rise and fall, but they do not disturb the deeper calm beneath the surface. Buddhist teachings often describe this calm as equanimity. Equanimity is the ability to remain balanced regardless of external reactions. It does not mean becoming indifferent or detached from human connection. Instead, it means maintaining inner steadiness while engaging with the world. A person with equanimity listens to others without becoming controlled by their opinions. They respond with kindness, but remain grounded in their understanding. When misunderstanding occurs, they do not rush to defend themselves aggressively. They simply recognize that not everyone will see their journey clearly. This recognition creates freedom, because the mind is no longer trying to control every interpretation. Freedom grows when the desire to perform disappears. Life begins to feel more direct. Instead of filtering every thought through the question of how it will appear to others, the person acts according to what feels honest and compassionate. This honesty simplifies decisions. The mind stops calculating how each step will be perceived. It focuses instead on whether the action aligns with wisdom and kindness. Over time, this approach builds confidence, not the loud confidence that seeks recognition, but a quieter confidence rooted in self-awareness. The person trusts their ability to learn from experience. They accept that mistakes will happen, but they no longer fear how those mistakes will appear to observers. Growth becomes more important than image, and this priority shifts the entire atmosphere of life. Conversations become more relaxed because there is no need to impress. Relationships become more genuine because interactions are not shaped by performance. People begin responding to you differently as well. When someone is no longer performing for approval, their presence feels authentic. Others may not always understand their path, but they often sense the calm confidence behind it. Some may become curious, others may continue misunderstanding, but neither reaction disturbs the inner peace that has begun to grow. This peace comes from living in alignment with clarity rather than with expectation. The mind recognizes that life cannot be controlled through public perception. It understands that every person will interpret events through their own lens. Instead of resisting this reality, it accepts it, and within that acceptance, freedom quietly appears. The person is no longer acting for an audience, they are simply living their path. When misunderstanding no longer disturbs the mind, something else becomes easier to notice. The constant pressure to explain yourself fades, the need for approval loosens, and the comparison with others begins to disappear. Life becomes quieter inside. Decisions feel lighter because they are no longer tied to how every action will appear in someone else's eyes. Yet, as this freedom grows, another hidden pattern quietly reveals itself. Even when no one is watching, many people still behave as if they are being observed. They speak carefully, they hide certain thoughts, they hesitate before making choices that might seem unusual. It is as if a silent crowd exists somewhere in the background of the mind, evaluating every step. This invisible presence shapes countless decisions. And this brings us to another truth about inner freedom. Stop living for an invisible audience. There is a subtle habit that develops slowly over time. It begins when people become aware that others are watching and judging their behavior. As children grow, they learn that their actions are noticed by parents, teachers, and society. Praise follows certain behaviors, while criticism follows others. Through these experiences, the mind learns something powerful. It learns that approval feels good and disapproval feels uncomfortable. This lesson quietly shapes the way people behave. At first, the desire for approval encourages cooperation and discipline. It helps individuals function within communities and social structures. But as this habit deepens, it begins to extend beyond real situations. The mind starts imagining judgments even when none are present. A person might hesitate to try something new because they imagine what others might think. They might avoid expressing their true opinions because they picture how those opinions could be criticized. They might follow a path they do not truly enjoy simply because it appears respectable in the eyes of others. In these moments, the invisible audience becomes real inside the mind. Even when no one is physically watching, the imagined opinions of others influence behavior. This psychological pattern can quietly control large portions of life. Someone might choose a career based on how impressive it sounds rather than on what brings meaning. Another person might hide their genuine interests because they fear being misunderstood. Others might delay important decisions because they worry about how those decisions will appear to friends or family. In each case, the imagined audience is guiding the action. The person may believe they are making independent choices, yet the shadow of judgment remains present. Buddhist teachings encourage careful observation of this habit. They remind practitioners that much of human suffering arises from attachment to reputation and image. When the mind becomes preoccupied with how it appears to others, it loses contact with the deeper awareness, guiding authentic action. The Buddha often emphasized the importance of mindfulness in recognizing these patterns. Mindfulness allows the mind to observe its own thoughts without automatically obeying them. When the thought appears, "What will people think?" mindfulness notices it. Instead of immediately reacting, the person pauses. They see that the imagined judgment is simply a mental event. It is not an objective reality. This recognition weakens the power of the invisible audience. The person begins questioning the assumption that every action must be approved by others. They start noticing how often the mind invents scenarios of criticism that may never actually happen. Many fears about judgment exist only in imagination. Someone may avoid pursuing a passion because they expect ridicule. Yet if they followed that passion, they might discover that most people are too occupied with their own lives to pay much attention. Someone may avoid pursuing a passion because they expect ridicule. Yet if they followed that passion, they might discover that most people are too occupied with their own lives to pay much attention. The mind had created a barrier where none truly existed. This realization can feel surprising. For years, a person may have adjusted their behavior according to an audience that was largely imaginary. When this becomes clear, freedom begins to expand. Instead of constantly asking how others will react, the person begins asking a different question. Does this action align with awareness? This question shifts attention from imagined judgment to present understanding. Awareness becomes the guide rather than approval. When awareness guides action, decisions come from a deeper place within the mind. They arise from observation of what is truly beneficial, compassionate, and honest, rather than from the desire to maintain a certain image. This shift transforms everyday choices. A person may choose simplicity even if it does not appear impressive. They may speak truthfully even when their perspective is unusual. They may explore interests that bring genuine curiosity rather than those that gain quick admiration. These actions create authenticity. Authenticity does not mean rejecting society or ignoring the impact of your actions on others. It simply means that behavior flows from understanding rather than from fear of judgment. The difference is subtle but powerful. When someone acts from imagined judgment, their attention is directed outward. They constantly monitor how their choices will appear to others. When someone acts from awareness, their attention remains inward. They observe their intentions carefully and respond according to what they understand to be wise and compassionate. This inward clarity creates stability. External opinions may still appear. Praise may come from some people, while criticism may come from others. But the person no longer depends on those reactions to determine their direction. Their compass is internal. Buddhist philosophy often describes this state as freedom from attachment to reputation. Reputation is not rejected entirely. It may still influence practical aspects of life, but it no longer defines the core of identity. The person understands that reputation changes easily. What one group praises today, another group may criticize tomorrow. Public opinion moves like shifting weather. Building identity upon it creates instability. But when identity rests on awareness, the foundation becomes steadier. Awareness observes circumstances without clinging to them. It recognizes that judgments are temporary expressions of individual perspectives rather than permanent truths. This understanding dissolves the pressure of the invisible audience. The person begins living more directly. They walk through daily life without constantly rehearsing how their actions might appear. They listen to others with openness, but they do not abandon their clarity in order to satisfy imagined expectations. Life becomes simpler. Energy once spent managing appearances becomes available for presence. The mind can fully engage with the moment rather than constantly evaluating itself through the eyes of others. This presence deepens relationships as well. When someone stops performing for approval, their interactions become more genuine. Conversations are no longer filtered through the desire to impress. Instead, they reflect honest curiosity and compassion. Others often sense this authenticity. They may not always understand the path being followed, but they recognize the calm confidence behind it. The absence of performance creates trust. People feel that they are interacting with someone who is not hiding behind a carefully constructed image. This honesty encourages deeper connection. At the same time, the person becomes more comfortable with solitude. Without the invisible audience constantly watching, silence feels peaceful rather than awkward. Moments alone become opportunities to observe the mind and reconnect with awareness. This solitude strengthens inner clarity. Each moment of observation reveals more about the habits shaping perception. The mind sees how easily it invents fears about judgment, and it gradually learns to release them. Freedom grows slowly. It does not arrive as a dramatic transformation, but as a series of small realizations. Each time the person chooses awareness over imagined judgment, the influence of the invisible audience weakens. Eventually, a new pattern forms. Actions arise naturally from understanding rather than from fear. The person walks their path without needing constant reassurance from others. And within that quiet independence, a deeper peace begins to settle in the mind. When the invisible audience fades from the mind, life begins to feel lighter. Decisions are no longer shaped by imagined judgment, and actions begin to rise from awareness instead of fear. The person who once adjusted every step for approval now moves with quiet independence. Yet as this freedom grows, another pattern becomes easier to notice in the way the world reacts to clarity. Something interesting often happens when a person begins living with deeper understanding. What once felt normal to others may suddenly look unusual. And the more clearly someone sees certain truths, the more confusing their behavior may appear to people who are still guided by familiar habits. This leads to another quiet realization. Wisdom often looks strange at first. Throughout history, many ideas that are now considered obvious once appeared unusual or even foolish to the people who first encountered them. Human understanding tends to grow gradually. When a new insight appears, it often challenges patterns that have existed for a long time. Because those patterns feel familiar, anything that questions them can seem strange. The same thing happens in personal life. When someone begins seeing the nature of attachment, ego, and desire more clearly, their behavior may begin to change. They might respond differently to situations that once triggered strong reactions. They may stop chasing certain rewards that society treats as essential. To someone observing from the outside, this shift can appear confusing. The person who once competed for recognition may suddenly become calm about status. The individual who once reacted strongly to criticism may now respond with patience. Someone who once followed predictable expectations may begin exploring a quieter, more reflective path. These changes do not always make immediate sense to others. The reason is simple. Wisdom often arrives before the world around it is ready to understand it. When a person begins discovering deeper truths, they are seeing something that others may not yet have observed in their own experience. The insight may feel clear and natural from within, but it still appears unfamiliar from the outside. This gap between understanding and perception creates the appearance of strangeness. Buddhist teachings often highlight this pattern. The Buddha himself introduced ideas that challenged many beliefs of his time. He questioned the idea that permanent satisfaction could be found through external achievements. He explained that attachment and craving were sources of suffering rather than paths to happiness. These ideas did not immediately feel comfortable to everyone who heard them. Many people were accustomed to chasing pleasure, recognition, and control over circumstances. Hearing that true peace required letting go of these attachments sounded unusual. Yet over time, those teachings revealed their depth. As individuals practiced mindfulness and examined their own experiences, they began recognizing the truth behind the Buddha's observations. What once seemed strange gradually became understandable. This process still happens today. Wisdom often enters life quietly through insights that challenge familiar patterns of thinking. These insights may feel uncomfortable at first because they ask the mind to question habits it has relied upon for years. For example, many people grow up believing that constant activity leads to fulfillment. The culture around them celebrates productivity, ambition, and endless movement. Being busy is often seen as a sign of importance. But when someone begins observing their mind carefully, they may discover that constant activity does not always create peace. They might notice how the mind becomes restless when it never has time to rest. This realization may lead them to value stillness. They may spend more time reflecting, meditating, or simply being present. To others who are accustomed to constant activity, this behavior might appear strange. Why would someone choose quiet moments instead of chasing opportunities for achievement? Yet, from the perspective of the person who has experienced the benefits of stillness, the choice makes perfect sense. They have discovered something that others have not yet explored. This is why wisdom often feels unusual before it becomes accepted. It asks the mind to reconsider assumptions that once seemed unquestionable. Another example appears in the way people respond to criticism. Many individuals instinctively react to criticism with defensiveness or anger. The mind interprets criticism as a threat to identity, and it responds by trying to protect itself. But someone who has developed awareness may respond differently. Instead of reacting immediately, they may listen calmly. They may observe the criticism without letting it disturb their sense of self. To an observer who expects conflict, this calm response might look unusual. They may wonder why the person is not defending themselves more aggressively. But the calmness comes from understanding something deeper. The person has recognized that criticism is often a reflection of another person's perspective, rather than a definitive statement about truth. This recognition removes the urgency to react. Peace replaces the need to defend. Again, wisdom appears strange to those who are still operating within familiar patterns. But over time, the value of that calm response may become visible. Others may notice how much emotional energy is saved by not reacting impulsively. They may begin questioning whether their own reactions are necessary. In this way, wisdom slowly spreads. It does not force itself upon others. Instead, it demonstrates its value through the peace it creates. Buddhist philosophy encourages patience with this process. Understanding cannot be rushed. Every person encounters insights at different moments in their life. Some may recognize certain truths early, while others may require years of experience before similar realizations appear. This diversity is natural. Just as seeds sprout at different times depending on their conditions, awareness develops according to each individual's experiences. Because of this, wisdom often exists quietly within individuals before it becomes widely recognized. The person who discovers a truth may feel alone in their understanding at first. They may wonder why others do not see what feels so obvious to them. But this loneliness does not mean the insight is incorrect. It simply means that awareness has appeared earlier in their journey. Over time, others may encounter experiences that lead them toward the same realization. When that happens, the truth that once seemed strange begins to feel familiar. This pattern can be observed in many aspects of life. Ideas that were once dismissed later become accepted wisdom. Practices that once seemed unusual later become widely respected. The same principle applies to personal awakening. When someone begins living according to deeper awareness, their actions may appear unconventional at first. But the peace they carry gradually reveals the value of their choices. People begin noticing the difference. They see how calm the person remains during challenges. They observe the absence of unnecessary conflict in their behavior. Curiosity begins to replace confusion. Some individuals may start asking questions. They may wonder how such steadiness is possible in a world filled with pressure and uncertainty. At that moment, the wisdom that once appeared strange begins to make sense. But even when this understanding spreads, the person who discovered the insight does not need to seek recognition for it. The purpose of wisdom is not to appear impressive. Its purpose is to reduce suffering and increase clarity. When someone truly understands this, they become comfortable with the fact that their path may look unusual to others. They do not expect immediate agreement. They simply continue living according to what they have seen clearly. And over time, the quiet strength of that clarity begins to speak for itself. When wisdom begins appearing in a person's life, it often carries a quiet quality. It does not shout for attention or try to convince the world immediately. Instead, it unfolds slowly, sometimes looking unusual to those who are still surrounded by familiar patterns. Over time, however, the calm presence of that understanding begins to reveal its value. People notice the steadiness it creates, the patience it brings, and the clarity that slowly replaces confusion. Yet there is another place where this clarity grows even deeper. Away from constant noise, away from endless opinions, away from the pressure to respond to every voice in the world. This is where another truth quietly appears. Solitude reveals your real direction. A strange thing happens when the mind is constantly surrounded by noise. Thoughts move quickly, reacting to everything that appears. Messages, conversations, expectations, and responsibilities fill every moment. The mind becomes busy trying to keep up with everything around it. In this environment, it becomes difficult to hear the quieter signals within. These signals are subtle. They appear as small feelings of curiosity, gentle questions about the meaning of certain choices, or quiet moments when the mind senses that something in life needs to change. But when noise dominates attention, these signals are easily ignored. Many people live for years in environments where silence is rare. Every moment is filled with information, entertainment, or conversation. Even when they are alone, the presence of devices and distractions keeps the mind occupied. This constant stimulation creates a kind of mental fog. The mind continues moving, but it rarely pauses long enough to observe itself clearly. Solitude changes this environment. When a person steps away from noise, even briefly, the mind begins slowing down. The absence of constant stimulation allows thoughts to settle naturally. At first, this stillness can feel uncomfortable. Someone who is used to constant activity may suddenly notice how busy their thoughts are. Without distractions, the mind begins revealing patterns that were previously hidden. Old worries may appear, unanswered questions may rise to the surface, memories and emotions that were pushed aside may become visible. This experience is sometimes mistaken for confusion, but in reality, it is the beginning of clarity. The noise that once buried these thoughts has faded, allowing them to be seen. Buddhist practice has long recognized the importance of solitude in developing awareness. Many monks and practitioners spend time in quiet environments, not because they wish to escape the world, but because silence creates the conditions necessary for deep observation. When external noise disappears, internal patterns become visible. A person sitting quietly begins noticing how thoughts appear and disappear. They observe how emotions rise in response to memories or expectations. They start recognizing habits of worry, attachment, and desire that once operated automatically. This observation changes the relationship with the mind. Instead of being carried away by every thought, the person learns to watch those thoughts with calm attention. Through this process, direction begins to emerge. Not the direction imposed by society or expectation, but the direction that arises naturally from understanding. Many people feel uncertain about their path in life because they are constantly responding to external signals. They listen to advice, compare themselves to others, and react to trends or pressures. These influences create a confusing mixture of expectations. One voice encourages ambition, another voice suggests security, another voice warns about risk. In the middle of these competing signals, it becomes difficult to hear the quieter voice of inner clarity. Solitude reduces these external influences. Without the pressure of immediate reactions, the mind has space to examine what truly matters. The person begins asking questions that are often ignored in busy environments. What kind of life actually brings peace? Which activities create genuine meaning? Which desires come from personal understanding, and which come from social pressure? These questions cannot be answered quickly. They require reflection. Silence creates the environment where reflection becomes possible. During moments of solitude, the mind gradually separates genuine motivation from borrowed expectations. A person might realize that certain goals they once pursued were shaped more by cultural pressure than by personal curiosity. They may discover that some desires no longer feel meaningful. At the same time, other interests may become stronger. Ideas that once felt distant begin to attract attention. A person may feel drawn toward learning, creativity, compassion, or inner development in ways that previously went unnoticed. These shifts reveal direction, not a rigid plan for the future, but a deeper understanding of what aligns with awareness. Silence clarifies what noise hides. Noise often encourages reaction rather than reflection. When surrounded by constant stimulation, the mind jumps from one response to another. It reacts to opinions, news, and expectations without examining whether those influences truly belong to its path. Silence interrupts this cycle. Without immediate distractions, the mind begins observing itself. This observation often leads to surprising discoveries. A person may notice how much of their thinking revolves around pleasing others. They may realize how often fear of judgment influences their decisions. These insights can feel uncomfortable at first, but they are also liberating. Because once the patterns become visible, the person gains the freedom to respond differently. Instead of automatically following old habits, they begin making choices with awareness. This awareness gradually strengthens inner direction. The person no longer depends entirely on external validation to guide their path. They learn to trust the clarity that arises through observation and reflection. Solitude also reveals another important truth. Many of the fears that influence behavior lose their power in silence. When the mind slows down, it can examine those fears carefully. It may notice that certain worries are built upon imagined outcomes rather than real threats. A person who feared judgment might realize that the imagined criticism rarely appears in reality. Someone who feared failure might discover that mistakes often become valuable lessons. These realizations reduce anxiety. The mind becomes less reactive because it has seen through many of the assumptions that once controlled it. Peace grows in this environment, not the temporary peace that depends on perfect circumstances, but a deeper calm that comes from understanding the nature of the mind. Solitude also strengthens compassion. When a person spends time observing their own thoughts and emotions, they begin recognizing how complex the human mind truly is. They see how easily confusion arises and how quickly emotions can shift. This recognition makes it easier to understand the struggles of others. Instead of judging people harshly for their reactions, the person remembers that everyone is navigating their own internal patterns. Compassion replaces impatience. This compassion becomes another guide for direction. Choices are no longer based solely on personal gain. They are also shaped by the awareness of how actions affect others. A life guided by awareness and compassion naturally moves toward meaningful contributions. Yet this direction rarely appears in crowded environments filled with noise. It emerges gradually in quiet moments, moments when the mind is free from the constant demand to respond, moments when awareness can observe without interruption. Through these moments, a person begins recognizing the deeper rhythm of their life. They see which activities bring clarity and which create confusion. They notice which relationships encourage growth and which reinforce old habits. These observations guide their decisions. Over time, the path becomes clearer. Not because someone else defined it, but because awareness discovered it through reflection. This is why solitude plays such an important role in awakening. It allows the mind to reconnect with itself. In silence, direction becomes visible, and within that quiet clarity, the journey continues forward with greater understanding. When solitude begins revealing your real direction, something important becomes visible. The noise that once shaped your decisions loses its influence, and the quiet voice of awareness becomes clearer. In silence, the mind begins recognizing which choices truly belong to its path, and which ones were borrowed from expectation. The clarity that grows in these quiet moments shows that many answers were always present beneath the surface of daily distraction. But another realization often appears right after this clarity. Even when the path becomes visible, many people hesitate to walk it. They pause, they look around, they wait for someone else to confirm that their direction is correct. This hesitation is deeply rooted in the human mind. It comes from the habit of seeking approval before acting. And yet one of the most powerful truths about transformation is this: growth does not require permission. A curious pattern exists in the way people approach change. They often feel the pull toward growth long before they act on it. Something inside them senses that their current habits are no longer serving them. They may feel that their mindset needs to shift, their priorities need to change, or their path needs to move in a different direction. The awareness appears quietly at first. It may show up as a subtle dissatisfaction with old routines. It might appear as curiosity about deeper meaning, or a desire to live with more honesty. Sometimes it arrives as a strong moment of clarity when a person suddenly sees that their life could move in a different direction. Yet after this realization appears, something else quickly follows. The mind begins waiting. It waits for reassurance. It waits for encouragement. It waits for confirmation that the change will be understood and accepted by the people around it. This waiting can last a long time. Some people delay their growth for years because they are unconsciously waiting for permission that will never come. They hope that someone will approve of their transformation before it begins. They imagine a moment when others will say, "Yes, this change makes sense. You should follow it." But real growth rarely arrives through approval. Growth often begins with uncertainty. It starts with a quiet decision that does not yet make perfect sense to everyone around you. The person stepping onto the path may feel clarity inside, yet the outside world may not immediately recognize that clarity. This gap between inner knowing and external understanding is where many people become stuck. They hesitate because they believe their transformation must first be validated by others. They assume that if the people around them do not fully understand their direction, then perhaps the direction is wrong. But this assumption often delays transformation. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the deepest changes in life begin within the mind. They arise through awareness of suffering, recognition of attachment, and the desire to live with greater clarity. These insights do not require a public announcement or collective agreement. They begin quietly. The moment a person sees clearly that certain habits are causing suffering, change can begin immediately. The realization itself becomes the catalyst. But if that realization is ignored while waiting for approval, the opportunity for growth remains suspended. Waiting for approval places your transformation in someone else's hands. It suggests that other people must validate your understanding before you are allowed to act on it. This creates a hidden form of dependence. The mind begins measuring its direction against the expectations of others. It looks for signs that the decision will be accepted, praised, or at least tolerated by the surrounding environment. But the people whose approval is being sought may not share the same awareness. They may not have experienced the same realizations that led you to question your old patterns. From their perspective, your desire for change may seem unnecessary or confusing. Because of this difference in perspective, approval may never arrive. If growth depends on approval, transformation can be delayed indefinitely. This is why Buddhist practice encourages personal responsibility for awareness. Each person must examine their own mind and recognize the patterns that create suffering. The decision to release those patterns cannot depend entirely on external validation. Someone may notice that anger repeatedly causes conflict in their relationships. They may see clearly that holding on to resentment brings pain rather than peace. This realization alone is enough to begin change. The person does not need to wait for others to confirm that letting go of anger is a wise choice. The insight itself is sufficient. Similarly, someone may recognize that constant comparison is creating dissatisfaction in their life. They may notice how measuring themselves against others generates anxiety. Once this pattern becomes visible, they can begin releasing it. They do not need a committee of approval to confirm that comparison is harmful. Yet the mind sometimes continues waiting. It asks questions that sound practical but often hide deeper hesitation. What if people think I am strange? What if others do not understand why I changed? What if this decision disappoints someone? These questions reflect the lingering influence of social expectation. The mind still wants reassurance that its transformation will be accepted. But growth requires a different kind of courage. It requires the willingness to follow clarity even when approval is uncertain. This courage does not mean rejecting others or ignoring their feelings. Compassion remains an important part of the path. But compassion does not require sacrificing your own awakening in order to maintain comfort for everyone else. A person who waits forever for universal agreement may never begin the changes that their awareness is calling for. Buddhist teachings often emphasize the importance of right effort. This effort refers to the commitment to cultivate wholesome qualities in the mind and to release habits that cause suffering. Right effort does not wait for perfect conditions. It begins when understanding appears. The moment someone sees clearly that a certain pattern is harmful, they can begin working to change it. They do not need permission to develop patience instead of anger. They do not need approval to practice mindfulness instead of distraction. These transformations belong to the individual mind. No one else can perform them on your behalf. This understanding also brings freedom from another subtle pressure. When people believe they need permission to grow, they often feel obligated to explain every step of their transformation to others. They try to justify their decisions. They search for ways to present their changes in a form that others will accept. But this effort can become exhausting. Growth is an internal process before it becomes an external one. It happens through observation, reflection, and gradual shifts in behavior. Attempting to explain every stage of that process to others can distract from the work itself. When you accept that growth does not require permission, you release that pressure. You allow your transformation to unfold naturally. Some people around you may understand the changes immediately. Others may need time to see their value. A few may never fully understand them, but your path continues regardless. Waiting for approval often keeps people trapped in the version of themselves that others expect them to remain. They stay within familiar roles because stepping outside those roles might create confusion or discomfort. Yet the purpose of growth is not to preserve the comfort of expectations. Its purpose is to reduce suffering and deepen awareness. Sometimes the most compassionate choice you can make is to evolve. By developing patience, clarity, and understanding within yourself, you create a presence that benefits others as well. Your transformation may eventually inspire someone else to examine their own habits, but that inspiration cannot occur if the change never begins. Growth moves forward through action, not through endless waiting. Each small step matters. Choosing to pause before reacting with anger. Choosing to observe your thoughts instead of believing every one of them. Choosing to act with kindness even when frustration appears. These moments of awareness are the building blocks of transformation. They do not require applause. They do not require validation. They simply require willingness. When the mind stops waiting for permission, growth begins moving naturally. The person recognizes that awareness itself is enough reason to change, and with each step taken from that awareness, the path becomes clearer. Not everyone will understand your path, and strangely, that is not a problem. It is part of the journey. Throughout this reflection, one truth kept appearing again and again. Truth does not need approval. People see life through limited vision. Everyone carries different karma, different timing, different lessons. Some will walk beside you for a season, some will question your choices, and others may misunderstand what your heart already knows. But the path of awareness was never meant to be a crowded road. It is often quiet, sometimes lonely, and deeply personal. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that clarity grows within, not in the noise of constant validation. When you stop chasing approval, stop comparing your life to others, and stop performing for an invisible audience, something powerful happens. Peace begins to grow. Compassion replaces frustration. You begin to see that everyone is walking their own path with struggles you cannot see, just as they may not see yours. And in that moment, freedom quietly appears. Freedom to grow without permission, freedom to walk forward without explaining every step, freedom to let misunderstanding exist without letting it disturb your mind. Because the truth is simple. Not everyone is meant to understand your path, but the ones who are meant to will recognize it through the peace you carry. Now I'm curious about your experience. Have you ever felt misunderstood while following what you knew was the right path for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone on their journey. And if this reflection brought you clarity, subscribe to the channel and join us for more teachings that help quiet the mind, deepen awareness, and bring peace to everyday life.